The first rays of dawn filter through the curved windows of the lighthouse tower, painting golden stripes across the worn wooden floor where Thomas has kept watch for 30 springs. His weathered hands wrap around a steaming cup of tea as he moves slowly, deliberately, toward the great lens that has been his faithful companion through countless mornings just like this one. The beacon's light fades as sunrise claims the horizon, and Thomas begins the ritual he has performed every dawn for 3 decades. His fingers trace the brass fittings of the Fresnel lens, checking each prism for salt spray and checking the mechanism that turns this massive eye toward the sea. The lighthouse breathes around him, settling into its daytime rest with gentle creaks and sighs that have become as familiar as his own heartbeat. Below, the harbor awakens with quiet purpose. Fishing boats emerge from the morning mist like gentle ghosts, their engines putting softly as they return from a night spent gathering the sea's bounty. Thomas knows each vessel by its silhouette, can tell by the way the Mary Catherine sits low in the water that Captain Murphy has had a good night's catch, while the dancing girl rides high, suggesting young Peter Collins will need to try different waters tomorrow. The keeper opens the tower's side window and breathes deeply of the spring air. Salt and seaweed mingle with the sweet scent of wildflowers that have begun to dot the lighthouse grounds. After the harsh winter winds that rattled these windows and sent spray nearly to the lamp room itself, this gentle morning breeze feels like a blessing against his skin. Seabirds circle the tower in lazy spirals, their calls a symphony Thomas has learned to read like sheet music. The terns announce clear skies ahead, while the gulls speak of fish running close to shore. A lone cormorant perches on the gallery railing, spreading its dark wings to dry in the strengthening sun, and Thomas nods to it like an old friend. From his lofty perch, the keeper can see the village beginning its day. Smoke rises from cottage chimneys where families gather for breakfast. Mrs. Henderson hangs laundry in her garden, white sheets billowing like sails in the morning air. The postman's bicycle traces its familiar route along the coastal road, and somewhere in the distance, church bells mark the hour with their bronze voices. Thomas descends the winding stairs to tend to the lighthouse's other needs. In the oil room, he checks the supply of fuel that keeps the beacon burning through the night. His logbook waits on the small desk where he records wind direction, visibility, ships sighted, and any unusual events. Today's entry begins simply: spring morning, clear skies, light winds from the southwest. The lighthouse garden calls to him next, and Thomas steps outside to survey the small plot where he grows vegetables and herbs. The soil is warming now, ready for this year's planting. He kneels among the raised beds, pulling a few early weeds and planning where the tomatoes will go, where the beans will climb their poles. This garden has fed him through 30 seasons, and its familiar cycles mark time more surely than any calendar. As the sun climbs higher, Thomas returns to the lamp room to begin the careful process of cleaning the lens. Each prism receives attention, polished until it gleams like crystal. This great eye must be perfect, ready for whatever the night might bring. Ships depend on its clarity, and Thomas has never failed to keep the light shining bright and true. The morning passes peacefully, marked by the rhythm of familiar tasks and the gentle sounds of the sea. Waves whisper against the rocks below, their eternal conversation with the shore. Somewhere offshore, a ship's horn sounds a greeting, and Thomas raises his hand in response, though he knows the crew cannot see him at this distance. By midday, the lighthouse stands ready for another night's vigil. The lens gleams, the mechanism runs smoothly, and the beacon waits for darkness to call it back to life. Thomas settles into his favorite chair by the lamp room window, his tea grown cold but the view as magnificent as ever. The sea stretches endlessly before him, changing colors as clouds drift across the sun. Today it wears shades of blue and green, with silver highlights where the light catches the waves. This view has been his companion through joy and sorrow, through storms and calm seas, through the long solitude of the keeper's life. As afternoon approaches, Thomas begins to think about the evening ahead. Soon, fishing boats will venture out again, depending on his light to guide them safely home. The beacon will pierce the darkness, sending its message across the waters. Here is safety, here is home, here is the faithful lighthouse keeping watch through another night. For now, though, the morning's peace continues, and Thomas simply sits, watching the sea and feeling the deep satisfaction of work well done, of promises kept, of light maintained against the darkness. As the first hints of dawn begin to paint the horizon in soft watercolor strokes, Thomas makes his way up the familiar spiral staircase of his lighthouse. His footsteps echo gently against the iron steps, a rhythm he has known for 23 years now. Each step carries him higher above the sleeping sea, toward the lamp room where his most cherished duty awaits. The morning air is crisp and clean as he reaches the top, carrying with it the salt-sweet scent of kelp and the distant call of gulls beginning their day. Through the tall windows of the lamp room, the world spreads out in all directions like a vast canvas painted in blues and grays. But Thomas's attention turns to the magnificent Fresnel lens that dominates the center of the room. The lens stands nearly 8 feet tall, a masterpiece of 19th century craftsmanship. Hundreds of individual pieces of crystal clear glass are arranged in precise mathematical curves, each segment cut and polished to bend light with perfect efficiency. In the gentle morning light filtering through the lamp room windows, the lens seems to breathe with quiet life, its surfaces catching and holding the first rays of sun. Thomas approaches his work with the reverence of a craftsman who understands the sacred nature of his task. He has cleaned this lens thousands of times, yet each morning brings the same sense of purpose, the same careful attention to detail. From his leather satchel, he withdraws soft cotton cloths, worn smooth by years of use, and a bottle of cleaning solution mixed according to a recipe passed down from the lens maker himself. Beginning at the bottom tier, Thomas dips his cloth in the solution and begins to work. The glass feels cool beneath his touch, smooth as silk and clear as captured air. He moves in small, gentle circles, removing the fine film of salt spray that the ocean winds have deposited during the night. Each piece of the lens requires its own careful attention: the large bullseye panels that form the main belt, the smaller triangular sections above and below, the delicate curved pieces that complete the intricate optical puzzle. As he works, Thomas loses himself in the meditation of the task. There is something profoundly calming about the repetitive motion, the gradual transformation from cloudy to crystal clear. His breathing settles into a steady rhythm that matches his movements. Breathe in as he dips the cloth, breathe out as he polishes. The rest of the world falls away, leaving only this moment, this lens, this quiet communion between keeper and light. The sun climbs higher, and suddenly the lamp room explodes with color. The freshly cleaned sections of the lens catch the morning light and fracture it into countless rainbows. Bands of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet dance across the whitewashed walls, shifting and swaying as Thomas continues his work. The patterns move like living things, flowing across the ceiling and down the walls in waves of pure color. Thomas pauses in his work to watch this daily miracle. No matter how many times he has witnessed it, the sight never fails to fill him with wonder. The lighthouse, built to guide ships safely to harbor, becomes for these few precious minutes a cathedral of light, transforming the utilitarian lamp room into something almost divine. He continues his careful cleaning, moving up to the next tier of glass panels. His movements remain unhurried, deliberate. There is no need for haste in this work. The light will not be needed until evening, and the lens deserves his full attention. Each piece of glass tells a story in its surface, recording the weather it has endured, the storms it has weathered, the countless nights it has helped guide vessels safely home. The cloth glides over the curved surfaces, following the mathematical precision of the lens design. Thomas understands that each piece has been positioned with exact calculation, that every angle serves a purpose in gathering and focusing the lighthouse's beam. As he cleans, he honors not only the lens itself, but the genius of the engineers and craftsmen who created this marvel of light and glass. Outside the windows, the sea has awakened fully now. Small fishing boats dot the horizon, their sails catching the morning breeze. Seabirds wheel and cry in the warming air. The world is beginning its daily dance of life and purpose, and Thomas is part of that ancient rhythm, tending his light as keepers have done for generations before him. With the final piece polished to perfection, Thomas steps back to admire his work. The lens stands pristine and gleaming, ready once again to transform a single flame into a beacon visible for miles across the dark water. Tonight, when mariners see that steady, welcoming light, they will owe their safe passage in part to this quiet morning ritual of care and devotion. The third Tuesday of March arrives with a gentle persistence, marked not by any calendar but by the familiar rhythm of waves against the lighthouse's stone foundation. Thomas awakens to the distant sound of an engine cutting through the morning mist, the supply boat making its weekly journey from the village below. He moves slowly through his morning routine, lighting the oil lamp in the kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast of porridge and dried fruit. The engine grows louder, and through the salt-stained window, he watches the sturdy wooden vessel navigate the rocky waters with practiced ease. Captain Morrison has been making this run for nearly 15 years, his weathered hands knowing every current and hidden reef as intimately as Thomas knows the lighthouse beam's reach. The boat rounds the final outcropping, and Thomas can see Morrison waving from the wheelhouse. Behind him, young Danny helps secure the morning's provisions: flour and salt, lamp oil and matches, fresh vegetables from the mainland markets. But most precious of all are the letters, carefully wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from the sea spray. Thomas descends the winding stone steps carved into the cliff face, his boots finding purchase on paths worn smooth by decades of lighthouse keepers before him. The morning air carries the scent of seaweed and salt, mingled with the faint sweetness of early wildflowers beginning to bloom in the sheltered coves. "Morning, Thomas," Morrison calls out, tossing a thick rope to the wooden dock. "Calm seas today, but there's weather coming from the northwest. Should reach you by Thursday evening." Thomas catches the rope with practiced ease, securing it to the weathered bollard. "I've been watching those clouds building on the horizon," he replies, his voice carrying the measured cadence of a man accustomed to solitude. "The gulls have been flying low these past 2 days." Danny passes down the wooden crates, each one stamped with the lighthouse service seal. But it's the leather mail pouch that draws Thomas's attention, swollen with what appears to be an unusually large collection of correspondence. "Popular man this week," Morrison grins, handing over the pouch. "Mrs. Henderson at the post office says there's near a dozen letters for you. Words gotten around about how you guided the Murphy brothers through that fog bank last month." Thomas accepts the pouch with quiet gratitude. Inside, he knows, are letters from families whose fathers and sons, brothers and uncles have been safely guided home by his lighthouse beam. The fishing fleet depends on his vigilance, and their gratitude arrives in careful handwriting on paper that still smells faintly of wood smoke from cottage hearths. After helping secure the supplies, Thomas waves farewell as the boat disappears into the morning haze. He climbs back up the cliff path, the mail pouch cradled carefully against his chest like something sacred. In the lighthouse's main room, he settles into his reading chair by the window, the one piece of furniture he brought from his former life in the village. The first letter is from old Henrik Larsson, whose grandson's boat had engine trouble 3 weeks ago. The boy had to anchor near the reef until dawn, but Thomas's light had kept him safely positioned until help could arrive. "Dear Keeper Thomas," the letter begins in Henrik's careful script. "My grandson speaks often of the night your light kept him company. He says it felt like having a friend watching over him through the dark hours." The second letter comes from Sarah Chen, the baker whose husband captains one of the larger fishing vessels. She writes about the comfort her family finds in seeing the lighthouse beams sweep across their cottage windows each evening, a reliable reminder that someone stands watch through the night. Thomas reads each letter slowly, savoring the connection to the village below. These people understand his purpose, the weight of responsibility that comes with tending the light. Their words carry the warmth of shared understanding, of lives intertwined by the ancient relationship between those who go to sea and those who guide them safely home. As afternoon light begins to slant through the windows, Thomas prepares his own correspondence. He writes to the harbor master, documenting his observations of the changing weather patterns, the subtle shifts in wind direction that speak of seasonal transition. He notes the migration patterns of seabirds, the temperature of tidal pools, the way morning mist behaves differently as spring gradually displaces winter. His pen moves steadily across the paper, recording not just meteorological data but the poetry of living by the sea. These reports help the fishing fleet plan their routes, but Thomas knows they serve another purpose: preserving the accumulated wisdom of lighthouse keepers, observations passed down through generations of men and women who have made the sea their lifelong study. As evening approaches, Thomas seals his letters and places them on the table near the door, ready for next week's supply boat. Outside, the first stars begin to appear, and it's time to climb the spiral stairs and light the beacon that will guide tonight's travelers safely home. Behind the towering white walls of Beacon's Point Lighthouse, where the endless Atlantic meets the rocky shore, lies a secret sanctuary that few visitors ever discover. Here, sheltered from the relentless salt winds by weathered stone walls built generations ago, Thomas has carved out a small paradise, his garden by the sea. The morning mist still clings to the ground as Thomas steps through the wooden gate, its hinges singing their familiar song. The air here feels different from the wild openness of the cliff face. It's softer somehow, warmer, protected by the embrace of those sturdy granite walls that his predecessor had built stone by stone, each one carefully selected from the shoreline below. Thomas moves slowly between the raised beds, his weathered hands carrying a battered watering can that has seen countless seasons. The metal surface bears the patina of salt air and gentle rust, but it holds water true and steady. Each plant in this sanctuary has been chosen with the wisdom of years spent understanding what can survive and thrive in this harsh, beautiful place. The potato plants stand in neat rows, their leaves a vibrant green against the dark, enriched soil. Thomas has learned to plant them deep, banking the earth high around their stems to protect them from the cutting winds that sometimes find their way over the walls. Their small white flowers nod gently in the morning breeze, promising a harvest of sustenance for the months ahead. Near the southern wall, where the sun lingers longest, climbing bean plants reach upward along a trellis Thomas crafted from driftwood gathered after winter storms. The beans themselves hang like small green jewels, growing fatter with each passing day. He remembers planting the seeds by moonlight, his lighthouse beams sweeping overhead as he worked, a rhythm as natural as breathing. The herb garden occupies the corner where two walls meet, creating the most sheltered spot of all. Here, rosemary grows thick and fragrant, its needle-like leaves releasing their piney scent at the slightest touch. Thyme spreads in a silver-green carpet, and sage stands sentinel with its velvety leaves. These herbs don't just season his simple meals, they connect him to the earth, to the ancient practice of tending and nurturing life. Thomas kneels beside a row of hardy lettuce, varieties chosen specifically for their tolerance to salt spray and cool temperatures. He pulls a few weeds with gentle precision, his movements deliberate and unhurried. There's no rush here in this protected space. Time moves differently within these walls, measured not by the urgency of ship schedules or weather warnings, but by the quiet pulse of growing things. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks below provides a constant, rhythmic soundtrack to his gardening. But here, softened by the stone barriers and filtered through the leaves of his plants, it becomes less of a roar and more of a whisper, the ocean's own lullaby that accompanies his work. A small greenhouse, its glass panels clouded by years of salt air, houses his most precious starts. Tomato seedlings stretch toward the light, their leaves that particular shade of green that speaks of health and promise. He's learned to start them early, to give them every advantage in this challenging climate. Each successful tomato plant represents a small victory, a triumph of patience and care over the harsh realities of coastal living. As the sun climbs higher, casting longer shadows across the garden beds, Thomas notices how the light catches in the droplets of water clinging to the cabbage leaves. Each drop acts like a tiny prism, breaking the sunlight into miniature rainbows that dance and shimmer with every gentle movement of the plants. The soil beneath his knees is rich and dark, a composition he's built over years by adding seaweed collected from the shore, kitchen scraps carefully composted, and the occasional barrow of earth carried up from the protected valleys inland. This soil holds the memory of every season, every plant that has grown and died and returned to nourish the next generation. A small wooden bench sits against the far wall, placed to catch both the morning sun and the evening's golden light. From here, Thomas can survey his entire domain, this small patch of cultivated earth that represents hope and continuity in a landscape often defined by wildness and change. As he waters the last row of vegetables, Thomas reflects on how this garden has become more than just a source of food. It's his connection to the cycles of life that continue regardless of storms, his proof that even in the most isolated places, patience and care can coax beauty and sustenance from the earth. The lighthouse beam will sweep across this garden tonight, illuminating his small kingdom with the same steady light that guides ships safely home. And tomorrow, he'll return to tend what grows here, continuing the quiet, essential work of nurturing life beside the eternal sea. The brass oil lamp casts its warm circle of light across Thomas's worn oak desk as evening settles around the lighthouse. Outside, the wind whispers through the rigging of the weather vane, a gentle counterpoint to the distant murmur of waves against the rocky shore below. The lighthouse beam sweeps its faithful arc through the darkness, as it has for countless nights before, while Thomas opens the leather-bound logbook that has been his constant companion for 7 years. The familiar weight of the fountain pen feels comfortable in his weathered fingers as he dips it into the inkwell. The date writes itself across the cream-colored page in his careful script, October 15th. Weather conditions: light southwesterly winds, visibility excellent, seas calm to moderate. Beacon operational, lens assembly cleaned and inspected. No vessels requiring assistance observed during evening watch. As the ink dries, Thomas finds himself turning back through the pages, each entry a small window into the rhythm of his solitary life by the sea. Here, written in the same steady hand, are the chronicles of storms and stillness, the record of ships guided safely through treacherous waters, the quiet observations of a man whose world extends from the rocky promontory beneath his tower to the endless horizon beyond. His fingers pause at an entry from 3 winters past, when the great storm of January 23rd brought winds that howled like banshees around the lighthouse walls. The glass rattled in its frames, and the beacon light wavered in its housing, but never failed. Gale force winds from the northeast, his younger self had written. Seas running 30 to 40 feet. Merchant vessel Catherine Marie observed taking shelter in the eastern bay. All souls aboard reported safe at dawn. Thomas remembers standing at his post through that endless night, his hand steady on the beacon controls as the lighthouse threw its saving light across the mountainous waves. He turns another page, finding the entry from his first summer here when the days were long and golden, and he was still learning the subtle art of reading the sea's moods. Fair weather continues, he had noted then. Fishing fleet departed before dawn, spotted 3 harbor seals on the eastern rocks at low tide. The memory brings a gentle smile to his lined face. Those seals have returned each summer since, raising their pups in the protected coves below. Their sleek forms a constant source of quiet companionship during the bright months when the sea lies calm and welcoming. The logbook holds other treasures too. The record of the autumn night when the merchant ship Northern Star lost her bearings in thick fog, her captain grateful for the lighthouse beam that guided her safely to port. Thomas had watched through the long hours as the vessel felt her way through the murky darkness, her running lights barely visible through the gray curtain that had settled over the water. When morning came and the fog lifted like a drawn veil, the ship was safely anchored in the harbor, her crew none the worse for their night of anxious navigation. Here, too, are the quieter entries, the daily observations that mark the passage of seasons around the lighthouse. Spring entries speak of migrating birds resting on the tower's iron railings, their small forms silhouetted against the morning sky. Summer pages record the comings and goings of the fishing fleet, the boats heading out before sunrise with their nets and hopes, returning in the evening heavy with the day's catch. Autumn entries note the changing colors of the sea itself, how it shifts from summer's blue-green to the deeper, more mysterious grays of the cooling year. Thomas adds a new line to today's entry: observed flock of cormorants heading south along the coastline. First sign of autumn migration. The birds had passed just after sunset, their dark forms barely visible against the darkening sky, but their distinctive flight pattern unmistakable to eyes that have watched these waters through countless seasons. As he closes the logbook and caps his fountain pen, Thomas feels the familiar satisfaction of duty fulfilled. Tomorrow will bring another entry, another small record in the ongoing chronicle of lighthouse life. The pages will continue to fill with observations of weather and wind, ships and sea creatures, the endless cycle of tides and seasons that mark time by the shore. The beam continues its steady sweep through the darkness, a constant guardian watching over the waters below. In its rhythmic flash, Thomas sees not just the fulfillment of his duty, but the continuation of a tradition stretching back through generations of lighthouse keepers who have stood watch at this same post, their own entries filling logbooks long since archived, their vigilance now part of the very foundation upon which his own service rests. The sea whispers its ancient lullaby against the rocks below, and another day's watch draws peacefully to its close. The morning light filters through the lighthouse's curved windows as Thomas climbs the familiar spiral staircase, his weathered hands trailing along the smooth iron railing. Each step echoes softly in the tower, a gentle rhythm that has become as natural as breathing after all these years. The sea stretches endlessly before him, its surface catching the early sunlight like scattered diamonds. As he reaches the lantern room, Thomas pauses at the great lens, its prismatic surface gleaming in the dawn. But today, something different draws his attention to the horizon. There, moving with ancient purpose through the deep blue waters, are the gray whales on their magnificent journey north. Thomas opens his worn leather journal, its pages filled with careful observations of wind patterns, tide schedules, and the countless visitors that pass his lighthouse home. His pencil moves across the paper in gentle strokes, capturing the graceful arcs of the whales as they surface and dive in their eternal dance. The first whale he spots is enormous, perhaps 40 feet long, its mottled gray skin scarred by barnacles and the stories of countless ocean miles. It rises from the depths with surprising grace for such a massive creature, water cascading from its broad back like a waterfall. The whale's breath creates a misty spout that catches the morning light, and Thomas can almost hear the deep, resonant exhale carried on the salt-tinged breeze. More whales emerge, traveling in loose groups along the coastline. Some swim close to shore, their massive shadows visible in the clear water. Others prefer the deeper channels, marked only by the occasional spout and the smooth curve of a diving fluke. Thomas sketches quickly but carefully, trying to capture not just their appearance but the sense of ancient wisdom they carry, these travelers who have followed this same route for thousands of years. A mother whale surfaces near the lighthouse rocks, and Thomas holds his breath as he notices the smaller form beside her. A calf, perhaps born just months ago in the warm lagoons of Mexico, now making its first journey to the rich feeding grounds of Alaska. The young whale stays close to its mother's massive side, learning the rhythms of breathing and diving, the subtle currents and landmarks that will guide its own future migrations. Playful dolphins have joined the procession, their sleek bodies cutting through the water with joyful precision. They leap and spin alongside the whales, riding the pressure waves created by the giant's passage. Thomas smiles as he watches their antics, sketching their graceful arcs as they soar above the waves before disappearing back into the blue depths. The lighthouse keeper sets down his pencil for a moment and simply watches. The whales move with such purpose, such quiet determination. They have been making this journey since long before his lighthouse was built, since before the first ships sailed these waters. They carry within them the memory of ice ages and warm epochs, of coastlines that have risen and fallen with the patient movements of the earth itself. One whale surfaces particularly close to shore, and Thomas can see the intricate patterns of barnacles on its skin, each one a small ecosystem riding through the ocean. The whale's eye, dark and intelligent, seems to regard the lighthouse with gentle curiosity before the great creature continues on its way, following some internal compass that Thomas can only marvel at. As the morning progresses, more whales pass by the lighthouse point. Thomas fills several pages with sketches and notes, recording their sizes, their traveling speeds, the way they breathe in coordinated patterns. He notes how some pause to feed in the kelp forests just offshore, their massive mouths filtering tons of seawater for the tiny organisms that sustain their enormous bodies. The sun climbs higher, warming Thomas's shoulders as he works. The whales continue their stately procession, unhurried but constant. Occasionally, one will breach completely, its entire body launching from the water in an explosion of spray and power that takes Thomas's breath away. These moments are gifts, he knows, glimpses of wild joy from creatures who spend their lives in the ocean's embrace. By midday, the last of the migrating pod has passed the lighthouse. Thomas closes his journal with satisfaction, knowing he has witnessed something timeless and sacred. Tonight, when he lights the beacon, the whales will be miles to the north, following currents older than memory toward their summer home. The sea settles back into its familiar rhythm of waves against rocks, but Thomas carries with him the image of those magnificent travelers, their ancient journey a reminder of the larger rhythms that govern all life. In his high tower by the sea, he feels connected to something vast and eternal, a guardian not just of ships, but of all the ocean's wandering children. The fog begins as a whisper on the horizon, a pale gray thread unspooling across the dark waters. Thomas notices it first from his position high in the lighthouse gallery, watching through salt-stained windows as the distant line grows thicker, more substantial. The evening sun, which had been painting the sea in shades of amber and rose, slowly dims behind this approaching veil of mist. By the time Thomas descends the spiral stairs to prepare his evening meal, the fog has crept closer, swallowing the furthest fishing boats in its gentle embrace. Their lights become soft halos, then fade entirely as the gray curtain draws across the seascape. The familiar rocks that mark the harbor entrance disappear one by one, like candles being snuffed out by an invisible hand. Thomas moves with the practiced ease of a man who has witnessed this transformation countless times. He checks the great lens above, ensuring its beam cuts cleanly through the gathering mist. The lighthouse stands ready, a sentinel prepared for its most important duty. When visibility drops to mere yards, when the sea and sky become one seamless gray expanse, the lighthouse truly comes alive. The foghorn sits silent in its housing, waiting. Thomas runs his weathered fingers along the brass fittings, checking the mechanisms that will soon give voice to his warning. The fog creeps higher now, climbing the rocky foundation of his tower home, reaching upward like gentle gray fingers exploring this familiar landmark. As darkness falls, the fog thickens into a soft, impenetrable wall. The beam of the lighthouse creates a cone of golden light that extends perhaps 20 feet before being absorbed by the mist. Beyond that narrow circle, the world has vanished. No horizon line divides sea from sky. No distant lights mark the passage of ships. There is only this gray cocoon, wrapping the lighthouse in profound silence. Thomas positions himself beside the foghorn and begins the ancient rhythm. A deep, mournful note rolls out across the invisible water's 3 long blasts, followed by silence. He counts the seconds carefully, timing each interval with the precision born of decades. The sound travels through the fog like a voice calling across a vast, gray cathedral, carrying further than sight can reach. From somewhere in the mist comes an answer, the higher-pitched horn of a cargo vessel, two sharp blasts acknowledging the lighthouse's call. Thomas smiles, feeling that familiar connection with the unseen mariners navigating these treacherous waters. Another voice joins the conversation, this one deeper, perhaps a fishing trawler making its way back to port. The fog becomes a medium for this maritime dialogue, carrying messages of position and presence through the gray silence. Thomas settles into his rhythm, sounding the horn every minute, listening for responses in the spaces between. The fog seems to muffle all other sounds, no crash of waves against the rocks below, no cry of seabirds, no whistle of wind. Even his own footsteps on the gallery floor seem absorbed by the thick air. It is as if the world has been wrapped in the softest gray wool, creating a cocoon of profound quiet. Hours pass in this gentle repetition. Thomas's voice joins the foghorn's song, humming old sea shanties under his breath as he maintains his vigilant watch. The beam continues its steady rotation, painting circles of light in the mist, while ships respond to his calls like distant relatives greeting each other across the gray divide. Near midnight, Thomas hears the low throb of engines drawing closer. A deep horn sounds much nearer now, followed by a higher response. Two vessels are coordinating their passage, using his lighthouse beacon and foghorn to navigate safely past the hidden rocks. He increases his attention, sounding the warning more frequently, knowing that somewhere in that gray void, captains are plotting their course by the rhythm of his call. The fog seems to pulse with its own gentle life, shifting and swirling in the lighthouse beam. Sometimes it parts briefly, revealing a glimpse of dark water or the shadow of a passing ship, before closing again like curtains drawn across a window. Thomas finds a deep peace in this shrouded world, in the steady repetition of his duty, in the knowledge that his voice carries safety through the night. As the hours drift by, wrapped in gray silence and punctuated by the foghorn's faithful call, Thomas feels himself part of something ancient and eternal, a conversation between land and sea, between the seen and unseen, between those who wait on shore and those who brave the mysterious waters beyond the mist. The workshop beneath the lighthouse stands as Thomas's sanctuary of purpose, a realm where time moves to the rhythm of careful hands and methodical thought. Morning light filters through salt-stained windows, casting geometric patterns across workbenches worn smooth by decades of devoted use. The air carries the familiar sense of machine oil and metal polish, brass shavings, and the ever-present whisper of sea salt that finds its way into every corner of this coastal world. Thomas moves through his domain with the fluid grace of long practice, his weathered fingers selecting tools with the certainty of a pianist finding keys. The great lens mechanism rests partially disassembled on the central bench, its brass components gleaming like golden treasures in the gentle light. Each gear wheel, each precisely machined bearing, tells the story of countless nights when this machinery has turned faithfully, sending its beacon across the dark waters to guide ships safely home. He begins with the smallest components, holding delicate brass fittings up to the window light, examining them with the patient eye of a master craftsman. A tiny gear shows the faintest wear on its teeth, barely visible to most, but Thomas sees it with the clarity that comes from years of intimate knowledge. He sets it aside for replacement, his movements unhurried, deliberate. There is no urgency here, only the quiet satisfaction of work done properly, thoroughly, with respect for the lives that depend upon this beacon's faithful service. The sound of his work creates a gentle percussion against the morning calm. The soft tap of a small hammer adjusting a bent fitting, the whispered brush of fine sandpaper smoothing a rough edge, the satisfied click as gears mesh perfectly together, their tolerances precise, their movements smooth as silk. These are the sounds of craftsmanship, of dedication made manifest in brass and steel and the sure touch of experienced hands. Thomas lifts the largest gear assembly, feeling its weight, its perfect balance. He applies oil with a brush so fine it might have been made for painting miniatures, working the lubricant into every bearing surface with methodical care. The oil catches the light like liquid amber, and he watches it flow into the precisely machined channels where metal meets metal in eternal rotation. This is meditation in motion, prayer made tangible through the devotion to duty that has defined his life beside this lighthouse for so many years. The backup systems receive the same meticulous attention. Springs are tested for tension, weights checked for proper balance, clockwork mechanisms wound and observed as they tick through their patient cycles. Thomas knows that somewhere in the darkness of a future storm, these systems may be called upon to keep the light burning when the primary mechanism fails. The thought of ships searching for guidance in the black night drives his thoroughness, makes every adjustment matter, every replacement bearing the weight of responsibility. He pauses to clean his hands on a soft cloth, then reaches for a brass telescope that needs attention. Its focusing mechanism has grown stiff with salt air and time. Working the lubricant into the threaded barrel, Thomas turns it slowly, feeling the resistance give way to smooth, precise movement. Through its lens, he can see the harbor far below, fishing boats preparing for their day's work, gulls wheeling in lazy circles above the gentle swells. The afternoon stretches peacefully before him as Thomas continues his work, each task flowing naturally into the next. A mirror needs resilvering. A lens requires the gentlest possible cleaning, with solutions mixed to his own exacting standards. Electrical connections demand inspection and tightening, ensuring the modern additions to his ancient light will serve reliably through whatever weather the sea may bring. As shadows begin to lengthen across his workshop floor, Thomas assembles the cleaned and oiled mechanism with the same patient care he brought to its disassembly. Each component finds its proper place, each connection made with the certainty that comes from deep knowledge and deeper dedication. The great lens apparatus comes together like pieces of an intricate puzzle, metal singing softly against metal as gears engage and springs find their tension. When the mechanism turns at last under gentle pressure from his hand, it moves with the fluid perfection of water flowing downhill. No binding, no roughness, just the smooth rotation that will carry this beacon's light through another season of service. Thomas steps back, wiping his hands on his apron, and allows himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The workshop grows golden in the late afternoon light, tools returning to their proper places, the endless cycle of maintenance and care complete for another day. Tonight, when darkness falls and ships seek the safety of harbor, this beacon will burn steady and true, its light reaching across the waves because one man understood that in the careful tending of small things, great purposes are served. The evening sky deepens to a rich indigo as Thomas settles into his favorite chair beside the lighthouse's main window. The lamp above rotates with its familiar rhythm, casting gentle sweeps of light across the darkening waters. In his lap rests a well-worn leather journal filled with maritime tales and lighthouse histories he's collected over the years. Tonight, as the autumn wind whispers against the glass, he opens to a page marked with a pressed sea lavender. The first story draws him to the rugged coast of Scotland, where the Bell Rock Lighthouse stands sentinel over treacherous waters. Thomas imagines Robert Stevenson's masterpiece, built on a reef that vanishes beneath the waves at high tide. He pictures the keeper there, perhaps at this very moment, polishing the lens as spray crashes against the tower's base. The Scottish keeper might be warming his hands around a cup of tea, listening to the haunting calls of guillemots nesting in the rocky crevices below. Thomas turns the page, his finger tracing the words that transport him to the chalk cliffs of Dover. There, the South Foreland Lighthouse has guided vessels through the English Channel for over 2 centuries. He envisions the keeper climbing the spiral stairs, just as Thomas does each evening, carrying the same sense of purpose that has connected lighthouse keepers across generations. Perhaps that keeper too pauses at his window, watching merchant ships navigate the busy shipping lanes, their lights twinkling like fallen stars on the water's surface. The journal's next entry carries him across the Atlantic to the rocky shores of Maine, where the Portland headlight stands proud against the American coastline. Thomas smiles, imagining a keeper there wrapping himself in a woolen coat as he steps outside to check the weather instruments. The autumn air would be crisp with the scent of pine and salt, much like his own coastal home. That distant keeper might be watching lobster boats returning to harbor, their hulls heavy with the day's catch, their wake creating silver ribbons in the moonlight. As Thomas reads about the Cordouan Lighthouse on France's Atlantic coast, he feels a deep kinship with its keeper. This grand tower, known as the King of Lighthouses, rises majestically from a small island. The French keeper, perhaps at this moment, is preparing for the evening's watch, adjusting the beam that has guided mariners since the days of sailing ships. Thomas imagines him opening his windows to let in the sound of waves lapping against the limestone foundation, the same eternal rhythm that lulls all lighthouse keepers to sleep. The stories transport him to Ireland's Skellig Michael, where an ancient lighthouse perches on a rocky pinnacle surrounded by the wild Atlantic. He pictures the keeper there, surrounded by puffins and storm petrels, sharing his isolated kingdom with seabirds that nest in the cliff faces. The Irish keeper might be watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of coral and gold, the same spectacular display that Thomas witnesses each evening from his own tower. Each tale in the journal connects Thomas to a vast community of light bearers scattered across the world's coastlines. There are keepers on the Mediterranean shores of Italy, tending beacons that have guided fishermen home since Roman times. Others stand watch on the Pacific coast of California, where foghorns echo through valleys of redwood trees. Some maintain lights on remote islands in the North Sea, where seals haul out on rocky beaches below their towers. As Thomas reads, he feels the presence of all these distant keepers, each one dedicated to the same sacred duty. They share the solitude of long winter nights and the joy of spring's first seabirds returning to their coastal homes. They understand the satisfaction of a well-maintained lens and the quiet pride of knowing their light has guided countless souls safely through the darkness. The wind outside grows gentler as Thomas closes the journal. He rises from his chair and climbs the spiral stairs one more time, checking that the beacon burns bright and steady. At the lamp room window, he looks out across the dark waters and imagines all the other lighthouse keepers around the world doing exactly the same thing. Each light a beacon of hope, each keeper a guardian of the night, all connected by the ancient calling to guide travelers safely home. The beam sweeps across the water, its light joining a constellation of coastal beacons that stretch around the globe, each one tended by hands that understand the noble responsibility of keeping watch through the darkness. Thomas smiles, knowing that somewhere in Scotland, in Maine, in France, fellow keepers are looking out at their own waters, sharing in this timeless vigil that connects them all across the vast, star-reflected sea. The sun has disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving behind a canvas of deep purple and indigo that gradually melts into the velvet darkness of night. Thomas climbs the spiral staircase one more time today, his footsteps echoing softly in the tower's hollow center. Each step carries the weight of ritual, of responsibility, of a duty that has been performed by lighthouse keepers for centuries before him. At the top of the tower, the great lens waits in silence. Its massive Fresnel glass catches the last traces of twilight, holding them like captured starlight. Thomas moves with practiced ease, checking the oil reservoir, adjusting the wick, ensuring everything is perfect for the night ahead. His hands know this work so well they could perform it in complete darkness, guided by muscle memory and years of careful attention. With a gentle whoosh, the flame springs to life. The beacon's warm glow fills the lamp room, casting dancing shadows on the curved walls. Thomas adjusts the lens mechanism, and the light begins its eternal rotation, sending its powerful beams sweeping across the dark waters in steady, measured intervals. Flash, darkness, flash, darkness. The rhythm is as constant as breathing, as reliable as the tide. He settles into his watch chair, a sturdy wooden seat worn smooth by countless nights of vigil. The cushion still holds the warmth from yesterday evening, a small comfort in the cool air that drifts through the lamp room. From his position, Thomas can see in all directions the rocky coastline stretching north and south, the endless expanse of ocean reaching toward distant horizons, and the scattered lights of the village below, where families are gathering around dinner tables and children are being tucked into warm beds. The thermos of hot tea sits within easy reach, steam still rising from its silver cap. He unscrews it carefully, the rich aroma of chamomile and honey filling the air around him. The first sip is always the best, warm and soothing, spreading comfort through his chest and down to his fingertips. This simple pleasure marks the true beginning of his night watch, a moment of quiet ritual before the long hours ahead. Through the clear glass walls of the lamp room, the sea stretches endlessly in all directions. During the day, it sparkled with sunlight and showed its moods in shades of blue and green and gray. Now, in darkness, it becomes something altogether different, mysterious and profound, its surface reflecting the lighthouse beam like a mirror made of liquid silver. The beam sweeps steadily across the rocky outcropping to the north, where seals sometimes rest, over the deeper waters where fishing boats might pass, past the dangerous shoals marked on every chart, and back again in its endless circuit. Each revolution takes exactly 10 seconds, a timing so precise that mariners can set their watches by it. This lighthouse has never failed in its duty, never missed a single sweep of light through storm or calm. A gentle breeze stirs through the open windows, carrying the familiar scents of salt and seaweed, the distant perfume of coastal flowers, and the clean smell of ocean air that has traveled thousands of miles to reach this shore. Thomas breathes deeply, feeling his shoulders relax as the day's tensions fade away. This is his domain now, his kingdom of light and careful watching. In the distance, a ship's horn sounds long, low, and melancholy. Thomas looks out toward the sound and sees a faint cluster of lights moving slowly across the horizon. A cargo vessel, perhaps, making its way along the shipping lanes. The captain and crew are probably gathered on the bridge, checking their position, noting the lighthouse beam that confirms their safe passage. They may never know the name of the keeper who tends this light, but they depend on his faithfulness nonetheless. The lighthouse beam continues its sweep, a guardian of the night that never rests, never wavers. Thomas settles deeper into his chair, the warm tea spreading comfort through his body, the familiar sounds of wind and wave creating a gentle symphony outside. His eyes scan the waters methodically, watching for any sign of vessels in distress, any call for help that might pierce the peaceful darkness. This is the sacred time when the lighthouse keeper becomes one with his tower, one with the light itself. The great beacon turns and turns, sending its message of safety across the dark waters. You are not alone, you are seen, you are guided home. And Thomas, guardian of the light, begins another night of patient watching, another night of keeping faith with all who sail these waters under the gentle guidance of the stars. The night settles over the lighthouse like a familiar blanket, and Thomas takes his position at the lamp room windows, watching the endless procession of vessels that traverse these waters after dark. The beam from his lighthouse sweeps across the ocean in its eternal rhythm, and with each rotation, new stories reveal themselves on the distant horizon. A cargo ship appears first, its hull sitting low in the water, heavy with goods destined for ports whose names Thomas can only imagine. Container stacks rise like miniature cities from its deck, each one holding treasures from distant lands. Perhaps there are spices from Mediterranean shores, or silk from Asian markets, or coffee beans that will soon fill morning cups in bustling cafes. The ship's running lights, red and green and white, create a constellation against the dark water, and Thomas watches as his lighthouse beam touches the vessel's bridge, offering its silent guidance. The captain up there might be studying charts, calculating currents and weather patterns, but Thomas knows that his light provides something more than navigation. It offers comfort in the vast darkness, a steady presence that says, "You are not alone on these waters." The cargo ship passes slowly, its massive engines creating a low hum that carries across the waves, and Thomas follows its progress until it becomes just another twinkling point on the horizon. Soon after, a fishing fleet emerges from the southern waters, their smaller vessels moving in loose formation toward the fishing banks. These boats Thomas knows well. He has watched them depart at dawn and return at sunset for years. The fishermen aboard are hardy souls who read the moods of the sea like ancient texts, understanding currents and weather with an intuition passed down through generations. Their boats dance on the swells with practiced grace, and their lights create moving patterns across the water's surface. The lead vessel adjusts its course slightly as Thomas's beam sweeps over them, and he imagines the captain acknowledging the lighthouse with a subtle nod. These are men who understand the language of lights and signals, who know that lighthouses are more than mere towers. They are guardians watching over all who venture onto the sea's uncertain embrace. As the fishing fleet disappears into the darkness, pursuing their ancient trade beneath the star-scattered sky, Thomas notices another type of vessel approaching from the west. This one moves differently, with the leisurely pace of pleasure rather than commerce. It's a sailing yacht, its white hull gleaming in the moonlight, returning from an evening cruise along the coast. Thomas can almost picture the scene aboard. Perhaps a family who spent the day exploring hidden coves and secluded beaches, or friends who watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Now they return to safe harbor, guided by his faithful beam, their day on the water complete and their memories rich with the sea's timeless magic. The yacht's sails are furled, and it moves under motor power, creating a gentle wake that spreads in silver V-shapes behind its stern. The lighthouse beam finds the vessel again and again as it sweeps its endless circle, and Thomas feels that familiar satisfaction that comes from fulfilling his purpose. Each ship, each boat, each vessel that passes safely through these waters carries with it a piece of his guardianship, a thread in the vast tapestry of maritime life that he helps to weave each night. A larger passenger ferry appears next, its multiple decks lit like a floating hotel. Thomas knows this vessel too. It runs the night route between the mainland and the outer islands, carrying commuters home after late meetings, tourists returning from day trips, and islanders who ventured to the city for supplies or medical appointments. The ferry's captain will be following a well-worn route, but even familiar waters hold their mysteries in the darkness. The beam sweeps over the ferry's bridge, and Thomas imagines the passengers settling into their seats for the journey, some reading books by the soft cabin lights, others gazing out at the dark water and thinking of home. Children might be falling asleep against their parents' shoulders, lulled by the gentle motion of the waves, while night shift workers begin another day of labor on the islands. As each vessel passes through his sphere of influence, Thomas feels connected to the greater world beyond his rocky promontory. These ships carry news and goods, dreams and stories, connecting distant shores in an endless network of human endeavor. His lighthouse stands as a fixed point in this fluid world, a constant presence that offers guidance and comfort to all who venture onto the sea's mysterious expanse. The night is still young, and more ships will come before dawn breaks across the eastern horizon. Thomas settles into his chair, his eyes trained on the dark waters, ready to offer his light to whatever vessels the night might bring to these ancient and ever-changing waters. The great lens slowly dims as Thomas turns the brass valve, watching the brilliant beacon fade to nothing more than a whisper of warmth in the early morning air. Around him, the lighthouse lamp room grows quiet, filled now only with the gentle creaking of cooling metal and the distant murmur of waves against the rocky shore below. Through the curved windows, the eastern horizon begins to blush with the faintest hint of rose. The darkness that has wrapped the sea all night long starts to retreat, pulling back like a soft blanket being drawn away from a sleeping child. Thomas places his weathered hands on the cool glass and watches as night slowly surrenders to day. The sea stretches endlessly before him, its surface painted in shades of deep purple and midnight blue. Small waves roll lazily toward the shore, their crests catching the first pale threads of light. There is no urgency in their movement, no hurry in their ancient rhythm. They simply continue their eternal dance, as they have for countless centuries before this dawn, as they will for countless centuries to come. A single gull appears in the distance, its white wings cutting gracefully through the morning air. It calls once, a clear note that carries across the water and echoes softly against the lighthouse walls. Soon, another joins it, then another, until a small chorus of sea birds wheels and dips above the waves, welcoming the approaching day with their familiar cries. Thomas descends the spiral staircase slowly, his boots making soft sounds against the worn stone steps. Each step carries him further from the lamp room and deeper into the quiet heart of the lighthouse. The walls around him are thick and solid, built to withstand the fiercest storms, yet this morning they feel gentle and protective, like the embrace of an old friend. In the kitchen, he sets water to boil for his morning tea. The kettle sits quietly on the stove, waiting for the flame to work its patient magic. Through the small window above the sink, he can see more of the dawn unfolding. The horizon now glows with bands of soft gold and amber, colors that seem to pulse gently with each heartbeat of the rising sun. He moves through his morning routine with practiced ease. The logbook receives its final entry of the night watch. All well. Clear skies, light seas, dawn at 6:23. His handwriting is steady and familiar, the words simple but complete. Another night has passed safely under his care, another circle completed in the endless wheel of days and seasons. The kettle begins to sing softly, and Thomas prepares his tea with the same quiet attention he brings to all his tasks. The leaves unfurl in the hot water, releasing their warm, earthy fragrance into the small kitchen. He wraps his hands around the cup and feels the gentle heat seep into his palms. Outside, the dawn light grows stronger by the minute. The sea transforms before his eyes, shifting from deep purple to royal blue, then to a softer shade of gray-green. The waves catch more light now, their surfaces sparkling like scattered diamonds. In the distance, a fishing boat appears as a tiny silhouette against the brightening sky, heading out to begin its day's work. Thomas settles into his favorite chair by the window, cradling his tea and watching the sun continue its patient climb. The lighthouse beam is no longer needed now. Daylight will guide any vessels safely past the rocks. His night's work is complete, and soon it will be time for rest. But for these precious moments, he simply sits and observes the miracle of dawn. The colors in the sky continue to deepen and change. Rose becomes coral, becomes gold, becomes the palest yellow. The sun itself appears now as a brilliant crescent peeking above the horizon, painting a shimmering path across the water that leads directly to where Thomas sits in his lighthouse home. The gulls call again, their voices now part of a larger symphony of morning sounds. Waves whisper against the shore. A gentle breeze stirs the seagrass on the nearby cliffs. Somewhere in the distance, a bell buoy chimes softly, marking time with the rhythm of the swells. Thomas finishes his tea and sets the empty cup aside. The sun climbs higher, chasing away the last shadows of night. His eyes grow heavy now, weighted with the satisfaction of duty fulfilled and the natural tiredness that comes with dawn after a long night's vigil. Soon he will climb the stairs to his bedroom, draw the curtains against the brightening day, and sleep peacefully while others take their turn watching over the sea. But for now, he remains at his window, a quiet guardian witnessing the eternal promise that each new dawn brings to the world. The lighthouse stands tall and proud against the morning sky, its work complete once more, ready to rest until darkness calls it back to service. The first morning of true summer arrives with a gentle warmth that seeps through the lighthouse windows, carrying with it the promise of longer days and softer evenings. Thomas awakens not to the sharp chill that has been his companion through the cooler months, but to a golden light that spills across his simple quarters like honey poured from a jar. The sea breeze, no longer cutting and fierce, whispers through the open window with the sweetness of wild roses and salt spray. He rises slowly, savoring this moment of transition. The lighthouse stands tall and proud against a sky painted in the softest shades of dawn, coral pink melting into lavender, then deepening to the clearest blue he has seen in months. The ocean stretches endlessly before him, its surface catching the early light like scattered diamonds, each wave crest a tiny mirror reflecting the promise of the day ahead. Thomas moves through his morning routine with unhurried precision. The lighthouse mechanisms, faithful as always, require his gentle attention. He checks the great lens, polishing away any trace of sea spray, ensuring that tonight's beacon will shine clear and true. But today, even these familiar tasks feel different, touched by summer's gentle hand. The real transformation becomes clear as he steps outside. Where once harsh winds demanded layers of wool and oiled canvas, now he walks comfortably in shirt sleeves, feeling the sun warm his shoulders and the breeze cool his skin. The clifftop garden, his faithful companion through seasons of waiting, has burst into magnificent life. Rows of vegetables that he tended carefully through spring's uncertain weather now stand proud and strong. Tomato plants heavy with fruit that blushes from green to gold to deep red. Bean vines spiral up their wooden supports, their leaves creating living curtains that dance in the gentle wind. The potato plants, their white flowers like tiny stars scattered across green foliage, promise the earth's bounty hidden below. But it is beyond his cultivated garden that summer truly shows her artistry. The cliff tops, brown and subdued through winter's grip, now explode in waves of color that rival the most magnificent sunset. Wild lupines reach toward the sky in spires of purple and blue, their leaves silvered with morning dew. Poppies dot the landscape like drops of liquid fire, their papery petals trembling with each breath of sea air. Golden California poppies carpets entire meadows, creating rivers of sunshine that flow between the weathered rocks and driftwood. Pink sea thrift clusters in cushioned mounds, their delicate flowers swaying on slender stems that bend but never break in the coastal wind. Wild iris stands regal in purple robes, while patches of orange paintbrush add bright splashes of color against the green backdrop. Thomas walks slowly among this natural gallery, his boots silent on paths worn soft by countless seasons of weather and wildlife. Butterflies dance from bloom to bloom, monarch orange wings catching sunlight, painted ladies in their spotted finery, and small blues that flutter like animated flowers themselves. Bees work industriously among the blossoms, their gentle humming adding to the symphony of summer. He pauses at his favorite vantage point, where a natural seat of stone allows him to survey both his garden and the wild beauty beyond. From here, the lighthouse stands like a guardian against the sky, its white tower a beacon of constancy in this ever-changing season. Below, the sea has transformed from winter's gray-green to summer's deeper blue, its surface painted with long ribbons of sunlight that dance and shift with each passing wave. The air itself seems different now, thick with the perfume of blooming flowers and the rich, warm scent of earth heated by sunshine. Salt spray still carries on the breeze, but now it mingles with the sweet fragrance of wild roses climbing among the rocks, their pink petals soft as silk against weathered granite. In the distance, seabirds wheel and call, their voices carrying stories of distant waters and abundant seas. Gulls ride the thermal currents rising from sun-warmed rocks, their wings spread wide in effortless flight. Cormorants dive and surface in the deeper waters, their sleek forms disappearing and reappearing like dark thoughts in a peaceful mind. As evening approaches, Thomas returns to his lighthouse duties with hands that smell of earth and flowers, his spirit renewed by summer's generous embrace. The beacon will shine tonight as it has through countless seasons, but now it illuminates a world transformed, a landscape painted in living color, where gentle breezes carry the promise of warm nights and peaceful dreams. The lighthouse keeper's year continues its ancient rhythm, but summer has arrived like a gift, wrapping the coastal world in beauty and bathing everything in golden light that speaks of abundance, growth, and the eternal dance between land and sea. The morning mist clung to the rocky coastline like a gentle embrace, as Thomas spotted the small research vessel making its way through the calm waters toward the lighthouse cove. He had been expecting Dr. Sarah Chen, the marine biologist whose letter had arrived 3 weeks prior, requesting permission to study the seabird colonies that flourished on the dramatic cliffs surrounding his lighthouse home. From his position high in the lighthouse gallery, Thomas watched as the boat navigated carefully between the familiar rock formations he knew by heart. The vessel's engine puttered softly across the water, its sound barely disturbing the peaceful morning stillness. Seagulls wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, their cries mixing with the rhythmic whisper of waves against stone. Thomas made his way down the winding lighthouse stairs, his footsteps echoing gently in the hollow tower. By the time he reached the small wooden dock, Dr. Chen was securing her boat with practiced efficiency. She looked up with a warm smile, her weather-beaten field jacket and sturdy boots marking her as someone who spent considerable time outdoors. "Mr. Thomas," she called out, extending her hand as she stepped onto the dock. "Thank you so much for allowing me to base my research here. I've read about this coastline in scientific journals for years." Thomas helped her gather her equipment, waterproof notebooks, binoculars, and several canvas bags filled with research instruments. "You're most welcome, Dr. Chen. I've been watching these birds for 43 years now, always eager to learn more about them." As they walked along the narrow path that wound up from the dock to the lighthouse cottage, Thomas pointed toward the towering cliffs that rose majestically from the sea. The puffins nest in those high crevices there, usually returning the second week of April. This year they arrived 4 days early, the earliest I've recorded in my logs. Dr. Chen paused, pulling out a small digital recorder. "That's fascinating. Early arrivals often indicate changes in ocean temperature or food availability. Have you noticed any patterns in their timing over the decades?" Thomas nodded thoughtfully, his eyes scanning the familiar cliff faces where thousands of seabirds made their seasonal homes. "Indeed, I have. The warming trend started about 15 years ago. Not dramatic, mind you, but consistent. The puffins arrive earlier, but the cormorants, those dark, sleek diving birds, they've been arriving later each spring." They settled on a weathered wooden bench Thomas had built years ago, positioned perfectly to observe the cliff colonies without disturbing them. The morning sun cast long, golden shadows across the rocky ledges where birds perched and preened in the gentle warmth. "My observations suggest the fish migrations have shifted," Thomas continued, his voice taking on the steady cadence of someone who had spent years watching and learning. "The herring schools that feed these birds now arrive in different patterns. Some years abundant, others scarce. The birds adapt but slowly." Dr. Chen listened intently, occasionally making notes or asking gentle questions about specific behaviors Thomas had witnessed. Her scientific training blended seamlessly with his intuitive understanding of coastal rhythms, creating a rich dialogue between academic knowledge and lived experience. "The storm patterns affect their nesting success tremendously," Thomas observed, pointing to specific ledges on the cliff face. "That section there, those narrow shelves, they're perfect for smaller species in calm weather. But during the fierce autumn storms, the birds that nest too low lose their young to the spray and wind." As the morning progressed, they moved slowly along different vantage points, Thomas sharing decades of accumulated wisdom about timing, weather patterns, and the subtle interconnections between species. He described the great skuas that patrolled the colonies, the delicate balance between predator and prey, and the remarkable navigation abilities that brought the same birds back to identical nesting sites year after year. "There's something almost mystical about their return each spring," Thomas mused, adjusting his binoculars to focus on a group of gannets diving for fish offshore. After months of following currents across vast oceans, they find their way back to these exact cliffs. "Makes you think about home, about the invisible threads that connect us all to place." Dr. Chen smiled, understanding the deeper poetry in Thomas's observations. Science and wonder, she had learned, were not opposites but companions in the quest to understand the natural world. The sun climbed higher, warming their faces as they sat in comfortable silence, watching the eternal dance of seabirds against the backdrop of endless sky and sea. Today marked the beginning of a collaboration between scientific method and traditional knowledge. Two ways of seeing that would enrich understanding for both the visiting naturalist and the lighthouse keeper who had made these cliffs his lifelong study. The gentle crash of waves below provided a soothing soundtrack to their shared contemplation of the magnificent coastal ecosystem that thrived in this remote corner of the world. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lighthouse grounds as Thomas gathered his tools, the familiar weight of his leather toolbox a comfort in his weathered hands. The weather vane high above had been squeaking for days now, its copper rooster spinning erratically in the gentle summer breeze that drifted inland from the sea. Today felt perfect for the climb. The air was still, the sky a soft canvas of blue stretched endlessly overhead. Thomas began his ascent up the winding staircase inside the lighthouse, each step echoing softly in the circular chamber. The wooden stairs creaked beneath his feet, worn smooth by decades of keepers before him who had made this same journey countless times. Sunlight filtered through the small windows at regular intervals, creating pools of golden warmth that he passed through as he climbed higher and higher. At the gallery level, he paused to catch his breath and check his equipment one more time. The copper weather vane gleamed dully in the morning light, its green patina telling the story of countless seasons spent facing the elements. Salt crystals had formed delicate patterns across its surface, like frost on a winter window, beautiful in their imperfection. Thomas opened the access panel and stepped carefully onto the narrow maintenance platform that circled the lighthouse top. The ocean spread before him in all directions, a living tapestry of blue and silver that seemed to stretch beyond the curve of the earth itself. The height no longer frightened him as it once had. Now it felt like ascending to a sacred place where earth met sky. The weather vane's copper surface was warm beneath his fingers as he examined the mechanism. Years of salt air had worked their way into the bearings, creating the persistent squeak that had drawn him up here today. He applied a few drops of oil to the pivot point, working it gently with his hands until the rooster began to turn smoothly once again. From this vantage point, the world below took on a dreamlike quality. The rocky coastline curved away in both directions, creating small coves where the waves lapped gently against sun-warmed stones. Seabirds drifted on invisible currents, their wings barely moving as they rode the thermal drafts that rose from the water below. On the horizon, fishing boats appeared as delicate white specks against the vast blue canvas of the sea. Thomas watched them with the patience of someone who understood the rhythm of maritime life. Each boat followed its own path, some heading out to deeper waters where the fish ran thick and silver, others returning home with their morning catch gleaming in wooden crates. The summer air carried the mingled scents of salt and seaweed, wildflowers from the clifftop meadows, and the faint aroma of wood smoke from chimneys in the distant village. A gentle breeze stirred his hair as he worked, bringing with it the calls of gulls and the distant sound of waves meeting shore in their eternal dance. Thomas took his time with the repair, not from necessity but from the pure pleasure of being in this elevated sanctuary. Each turn of his wrench was deliberate and careful, his movements unhurried. The weather vane responded to his attention like an old friend, its mechanism growing smoother with each adjustment. As he worked, he found himself lost in the meditation of small, precise tasks. There was something deeply satisfying about restoring function to this simple device that had guided sailors and predicted weather changes for generations. The copper rooster, with its proud stance and outstretched wings, would once again serve its purpose faithfully. When the repair was complete, Thomas gave the weather vane a gentle spin, watching with satisfaction as it rotated freely and silently. It caught the breeze immediately, swinging to point southeast where a bank of distant clouds suggested weather changes still hours away. The mechanism was perfectly balanced now, responding to the slightest shift in wind direction. Before beginning his descent, Thomas allowed himself a few more minutes to absorb the panoramic view. The fishing boats had moved farther out to sea, their white sails now barely visible against the shimmering horizon. Closer to shore, he could see children playing on the beach below, their laughter carried upward on the warm summer air like musical notes. The climb down felt different somehow, as if he were carrying with him the peace and perspective that only came from such heights. Each step brought him back to the earthbound world, but the memory of that elevated view remained with him, a reminder of the larger rhythms that governed life by the sea. Thomas set his tools aside and stepped outside, looking up to see the weather vane spinning gently in the afternoon breeze, its copper surface gleaming like burnished gold in the summer sun. The morning fog lifts slowly from the water like a gentle curtain, being drawn back by invisible hands. Thomas stands at his kitchen window, watching the harbor emerge from its misty shroud, when he notices something unusual on his doorstep. A small wooden crate sits there, weathered and salt-stained, with a folded piece of parchment tucked beneath its rope handle. He opens the door carefully, breathing in the crisp autumn air that carries the scent of kelp and distant rain. The parchment crackles softly as he unfolds it, revealing words written in careful script. For the keeper who guided us home. Captain William Morrison, the seabird's dream. Thomas remembers that night 3 weeks ago when the storm rolled in without warning. The wind had howled like a living thing, driving sheets of rain horizontal across the rocks. He had stayed at his post through the long hours, keeping the beacon burning bright as ship after ship found safe harbor in its steady glow. The Seabird's dream had been among the last to arrive, her sails torn and her crew exhausted but grateful. Now, as Thomas lifts the lid of the captain's gift, he discovers treasures that speak of distant shores and far-off adventures. Nestled in soft canvas cloth lies a piece of carved whale bone, smooth as silk from countless hands that have held it. The scrimshaw depicts a lighthouse much like his own, standing tall against crashing waves, surrounded by intricate patterns that flow like water itself. Beside the bone rest shells unlike any Thomas has found on his own beaches. One gleams with the deep purple of twilight skies, its surface rippled like frozen waves. Another catches the light with pearl-white spirals that seem to glow from within. A third, flat and round, bears tiny perforations that whistle softly when the breeze passes through them, creating a gentle melody that mingles with the eternal song of the sea. Thomas carries his treasures inside, adding them to the collection that lines his sitting room shelves. Each piece tells a story of gratitude, of lives protected by his faithful vigil. There's the brass compass from Captain Edwards, its needle still pointing true after 20 years. The jade figurine from a merchant vessel bound for the Orient, green as deep ocean water. The leather-bound journal from a naval officer, filled with sketches of seabirds and distant coastlines. These gifts represent more than mere objects. They are connections to the wider world that Thomas serves from his solitary post. Each captain who passes his light carries news from ports far and wide, and their offerings become windows into lives and adventures beyond the horizon. The whalebone speaks of Arctic expeditions and the great creatures that swim in polar seas. The exotic shells whisper of tropical waters where coral reefs bloom like underwater gardens. As afternoon settles into evening, Thomas places the carved bone on the mantelpiece where the firelight can dance across its intricate patterns. The shells find their place among his maritime treasures, their gentle colors catching the lamplight like captured moonbeams. He runs his fingers along the whale bone's smooth surface, feeling the careful work of hands that crafted this gift during long nights at sea. The lighthouse begins its nightly ritual as Thomas climbs the spiral stairs to light the beacon. From his lamp room windows, he can see fishing boats returning with the day's catch, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies on the darkening water. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the seabird's dream continues her journey, but part of her story now rests safely in Thomas's keeping, adding to the rich tapestry of maritime memories that fill his lighthouse home. The beam sweeps across the water in its eternal rotation, a promise of safety for all who sail these waters. Thomas thinks of Captain Morrison and his crew, now perhaps sharing tales of their storm and rescue in some distant tavern. The gift they left behind will outlast their voyage, becoming part of the lighthouse's own story, a testament to the bonds forged between those who brave the sea and those who guide them safely home. As the night deepens and stars emerge like scattered diamonds above, Thomas settles into his chair beside the fire. The whale bone gleams softly in the flickering light, and the shells seem to murmur with the memory of distant tides. These gifts from grateful mariners surround him with warmth, each one a reminder that his solitary vigil serves a purpose greater than himself, connecting him to every soul who finds safe passage by his light. The morning sun rises over the lighthouse grounds, casting long shadows across the weathered stone pathways. Thomas stands at the base of the tower, his paint brushes clean and ready in their bucket, cans of pristine white and vibrant red paint arranged carefully beside him. Today marks the beginning of the annual ritual that keeps his lighthouse beautiful and visible to ships far out at sea. He begins his ascent up the spiral staircase inside the tower, carrying his supplies with practiced ease. Each step echoes softly in the circular chamber, a rhythm he has known for decades. The wooden stairs are worn smooth by countless trips up and down, polished by years of faithful service. Through the small windows that punctuate the climb, glimpses of the ocean sparkle in the morning light. At the top of the tower, Thomas steps out onto the gallery that encircles the lamp room. The sea breeze greets him like an old friend, gentle and refreshing in the summer warmth. From this height, he can see for miles across the water, where fishing boats bob like toys on the horizon and seabirds wheel and dive in graceful arcs. Thomas begins with the uppermost section, dipping his brush into the white paint. The bristles are soft and well-worn, shaped by years of careful use. He applies the paint with long, smooth strokes, watching as the fresh white covers the weathered surface beneath. The old paint has served its purpose through winter storms and summer heat, but now it's time for renewal. Working methodically, he moves around the gallery, painting each section with patient precision. The white paint gleams wet in the sunlight, brilliant and pure against the blue sky. Thomas takes his time, ensuring every stroke is even, every corner properly covered. This is not work to be rushed. The lighthouse depends on its visibility, and sailors depend on the lighthouse. As the morning progresses, the sun climbs higher, warming Thomas's back as he works. The sound of waves lapping against the rocks below provides a steady rhythm, punctuated by the calls of gulls and the distant horn of a passing vessel. The fresh paint has a clean, sharp scent that mingles with the salt air and the wild roses that grow along the lighthouse grounds. Thomas pauses occasionally to wipe his hands on his old painting clothes, garments that have absorbed years of white and red paint, becoming a canvas of their own. He sips water from his thermos and looks out across the water, watching a sailing yacht cut through the gentle swells, its white sail billowing in the steady breeze. By midday, the upper section gleams with fresh white paint. Thomas begins the careful transition to the red stripe, masking the edges with practiced precision. The red paint is rich and bold, the color of ripe cherries and summer roses. As he applies it in careful bands around the tower, the lighthouse begins to take on its distinctive appearance once more. The red stripes serve a crucial purpose, making the lighthouse easily recognizable during daylight hours. Each lighthouse along the coast has its own pattern of colors and shapes, a unique signature that helps mariners identify their position. Thomas takes pride in maintaining these bold stripes, ensuring they remain crisp and clear. The afternoon sun beats down more intensely now, but the sea breeze keeps the temperature comfortable. Thomas works his way down the tower section by section, the fresh paint creating a stunning contrast against the weathered stone foundation. Seabirds perch on nearby rocks, seemingly approving of the lighthouse's renewed appearance. As evening approaches, Thomas steps back to admire his progress. The upper portions of the tower gleam brilliantly white, striped with vibrant red bands that stand out sharply against the deepening blue of the sky. The paint will dry overnight, and tomorrow he will continue his descent, working methodically until every inch of the tower has been refreshed. The lighthouse beam begins its nightly rotation, the powerful light sweeping across the painted surfaces Thomas has renewed. The fresh paint reflects the beam more brightly than before, sending the signal farther out to sea. Ships passing in the darkness will see this beacon more clearly now, guided safely around the rocky coastline by the lighthouse's faithful light. Thomas gathers his brushes and paint cans, securing them carefully for tomorrow's work. As he descends the spiral staircase, the sound of his footsteps mingles with the eternal rhythm of the waves. The lighthouse stands taller and prouder now, its fresh coat of paint a testament to the dedication of its keeper. Outside, the evening air carries the scent of drying paint and salt spray. Thomas looks up at his handiwork, illuminated by the rotating beam, and feels the deep satisfaction that comes from work well done. Tomorrow will bring another day of patient painting, another step in the endless cycle of maintenance and care that keeps the lighthouse standing strong against time and weather. The morning mist lifts slowly from the water as Thomas steps out onto the lighthouse gallery, his weathered hands wrapping around the warm ceramic mug of tea that has become his ritual greeting to each new day. Below him, stretching across the sun-warmed rocks that guard the base of his lighthouse, a remarkable sight unfolds in the gentle summer light. The seal colony has returned. Dozens of gray seals sprawl across the dark basalt ledges, their sleek bodies glistening like polished stones in the early sunlight. Thomas reaches for his telescope, the brass instrument catching the golden rays as he adjusts the focus with practiced fingers. Through the lens, the rocky shore transforms into an intimate theater of marine life, each seal a character in nature's endless summer drama. A large bull seal, his massive frame scarred from countless seasons of ocean adventures, claims the highest rock as his throne. His thick neck bears the marks of age and experience, and his deep, rumbling calls echo off the lighthouse walls like distant thunder. Around him, smaller seals arrange themselves in what seems like careful social order, some basking with flippers raised to catch every ray of warming sun, others sliding gracefully into the crystal-clear tide pools to cool their dark coats. Thomas lowers his telescope and simply watches with naked eyes as three young seals engage in what can only be described as play. They chase each other through the shallow water, their sleek forms cutting through the surface like living torpedoes, sending cascades of diamond droplets into the air. When they emerge, shaking the salt water from their whiskers, their large, dark eyes seem to sparkle with pure joy. The keeper has learned to read the subtle language of the colony. The gentle grunts and barks that drift up to his perch tell stories of comfort and contentment. Mothers call softly to their pups, who respond with high-pitched bleats that remind Thomas of the lamb calls he once heard in the countryside of his youth. The sounds blend with the rhythm of waves against rock, creating a symphony that has become the soundtrack to his summer days. A movement near the water's edge catches his attention. A mother seal has hauled herself onto a lower ledge, and beside her rests a tiny pup, no more than a few days old. The baby's coat is still the creamy white of youth, fluffy and impossibly soft-looking. Thomas watches through his telescope as the mother gently nudges her offspring, encouraging it toward the water for its first swimming lesson. The pup seems hesitant, its small flippers paddling uncertainly at the edge of the rock. But with patient guidance, it slips into the shallow water, its natural instincts taking over as it discovers the buoyancy of its ocean home. Thomas finds himself holding his breath, invested in this small creature's first adventure. When the pup surfaces successfully, shaking water from its whiskers with evident surprise, Thomas releases a quiet chuckle of relief and pride. As the morning progresses, the sun climbs higher, warming the rocks to perfect basking temperature. More seals emerge from the depths, hauling their substantial forms onto ledges with surprising grace. They arrange themselves like sunbathers at some exclusive seaside resort, some lying flat with flippers spread wide, others propped up on their sides, all facing the warming rays. Thomas has come to recognize individuals among the colony regulars. There's the scarred female with the distinctive notch in her left flipper, probably from a long-ago encounter with a fishing net. She always claims the same spot near the tide pool where small fish gather. The elderly male with the graying muzzle prefers the highest accessible ledge, where he can survey both sea and shore with the dignity of an ocean patriarch. The afternoon brings a gentle breeze that carries the rich, briny scent of kelp and salt water up to the lighthouse gallery. Below, the seals seem to sense the approaching high tide. Some slip gracefully back into the deeper water, their movements as fluid as liquid mercury. Others remain on the rocks, content to let the rising water lap at their flippers. As evening approaches and Thomas lights the beacon for another night's vigil, the seal colony settles into quieter rhythms. The playful chases give way to peaceful floating, with heads bobbing gently in the calm water like living boys. The mothers and pups huddle close on the rocks, creating touching silhouettes against the darkening sea. Thomas dims his lantern and listens to the gentle sounds drifting up from below, the soft splash of a seal entering the water, the contented grunt of one settling into sleep, the distant call of a gull bidding farewell to another perfect summer day. The lighthouse beam sweeps steadily across the peaceful scene, a guardian light watching over both keeper and colony through the gentle night ahead. The morning air carries a different quality today, one that speaks to Thomas in the ancient language of wind and wave. He stands on the lighthouse gallery, his weathered hands gripping the iron railing, reading the sky like a well-worn book. The horizon, usually a clean line between sea and heaven, has begun to blur with a haze that whispers of distant disturbances. Thomas has lived through 47 summers by this lighthouse, and each one has taught him something new about the sea's moods. This morning, the wind has shifted from its usual gentle southwesterly caress to something more insistent, more purposeful. It carries with it the faint smell of rain still hours away, mixed with the sharp tang of salt spray kicked higher than usual from the waves below. The clouds tell their own story. Where yesterday brought the soft, cotton ball formations that drifted lazily across the blue canvas, today presents something altogether different. To the southeast, towering columns of white and gray rise like nature's own cathedrals, their tops spreading into the familiar anvil shape that promises thunder and lightning. They move with deliberate slowness, gathering strength and moisture as they travel across the warming waters. Thomas descends the spiral staircase, his boots echoing softly in the lighthouse's hollow core. Each step is measured, unhurried, for he knows that preparation done in haste often leaves important details forgotten. In his small quarters, he retrieves a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with decades of weather observations. His careful handwriting notes wind direction, barometric pressure readings from his simple glass instrument, and the subtle changes in wave patterns he's observed over the past 3 days. The ritual of storm preparation begins with the lighthouse itself. Thomas climbs once more to the lamp room, where the great lens sits waiting for evening. He checks the oil reservoirs, ensuring they're full to capacity. During storms, the lighthouse becomes even more crucial, its beam a lifeline for any vessels caught in nature's fury. He adjusts the wick mechanisms, cleaning away any dust or salt residue that might diminish the flame's brightness. Outside, loose items around the lighthouse base demand attention. The small wooden chair where Thomas often sits to watch the sunset gets carried inside, along with his weather instruments and the rope coils he uses for maintenance work. A loose shutter on the storage shed receives several firm hammer blows, each strike echoing across the rocky outcropping. The sound mingles with the increasing murmur of waves against the stones below. Thomas opens the storm shutters over his windows, testing their latches and hinges. The wood, painted white to reflect the sun's heat, has weathered countless gales. Small repairs done throughout the year prove their worth now: a tightened screw here, a fresh coat of paint there, all combining to ensure his lighthouse home remains secure. In his pantry, Thomas takes inventory of supplies. Kerosene for cooking and emergency lighting sits in neat rows of blue bottles. Dried fish, hardtack biscuits, and preserved vegetables fill wooden crates. Fresh water barrels, topped off just 2 days ago during his weekly trip to the mainland, stand ready. He's learned that storms often last longer than expected, and being prepared for several days of isolation brings peace of mind. The wind continues to build, no longer the gentle companion of summer mornings, but something with teeth and determination. It whistles through the lighthouse's metal fixtures with a rising pitch that speaks of the power building offshore. The waves below have grown from their usual lazy lapping against the rocks to more insistent surges that send spray higher up the lighthouse walls. Thunder rolls across the water, still distant but unmistakable. Thomas pauses in his preparations to listen, counting the seconds between flash and rumble. Miles away still, but approaching with the steady patience that makes ocean storms so formidable. He's witnessed many such tempests from this vantage point, and while they command respect, they also hold a certain wild beauty that never fails to humble him. As afternoon light begins to filter through the thickening clouds, casting everything in a golden gray glow that photographers would envy, Thomas completes his final checks. The lighthouse stands ready, its beacon prepared to shine through whatever darkness the night might bring. The keeper, too, is ready not with fear, but with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing his responsibilities and having fulfilled them well. The sea continues to build, each wave slightly larger than the last, and Thomas settles into his chair by the window to watch and wait. The storm will come in its own time, as storms always do, and he will be here to tend his light through whatever the night may hold. The first drops of rain arrive like gentle messengers, tapping softly against the lighthouse windows as Thomas completes his evening rounds. He pauses at the lamp room, watching the horizon where dark clouds gather in rolling formations, their edges touched with the last golden light of sunset. The sea below has begun to stir, its surface shifting from mirror-smooth calm to gentle swells that catch and scatter the lighthouse beam. As darkness settles over the coastal waters, the wind begins its quiet conversation with the tower. At first, it whispers around the lantern room, a soft murmur that Thomas has heard countless times before. But tonight, there's something different in its voice, a deeper note that speaks of change approaching from the vast expanse of ocean. Thomas descends the spiral stairs, his hand trailing along the familiar iron railing that has guided countless keepers before him. In the watchroom, he settles into his well-worn chair, the lighthouse logbook open beside him. The brass clock ticks steadily, marking time as the storm builds its strength beyond the walls. The rain intensifies gradually, transforming from gentle droplets to steady streams that trace silver paths down the windows. Thomas watches the water flow, mesmerized by its endless dance. Each rivulet follows its own course, some joining together to form larger streams, others finding solitary paths toward the window's edge. The sound is like a lullaby, soft, constant, deeply soothing. Outside, the wind grows bolder in its embrace of the lighthouse. It wraps around the cylindrical tower, testing its strength with playful gusts that gradually grow more insistent. The structure responds with barely perceptible movements, swaying ever so slightly in the ancient dance between human construction and natural force. But the lighthouse has weathered decades of such nights, its foundation anchored deep into the bedrock, its walls built to endure. Thomas rises periodically to check the beacon, climbing the stairs with unhurried steps. The powerful lens continues its faithful rotation, casting its beam far across the darkened waters. Even through the rain-streaked windows, the light reaches out into the storm, a steady pulse of safety for any vessels that might be seeking harbor. The mechanism turns with precision, its gears well-oiled and maintained, untroubled by the weather's display outside. The sea has awakened fully now, its surface alive with white-capped waves that catch fragments of the lighthouse beam. From his elevated position, Thomas can see the water's endless motion rolling, cresting, falling back into itself in patterns both chaotic and strangely rhythmic. The waves approach the rocky shore below with increasing enthusiasm, sending up sprays of foam that glitter momentarily in the lighthouse's sweep before dissolving back into darkness. As the night deepens, the storm finds its full voice. Rain drums against the windows with greater intensity, while the wind sings through the tower's metal framework. But these are not harsh sounds, they form a natural symphony that speaks of the earth's ancient rhythms. Thomas listens with the contentment of someone who has learned to hear music in what others might consider noise. The lighthouse stands unmoved through it all, its beacon never faltering. The great lens continues its rotation, casting light through rain and wind without pause. Thomas feels a deep satisfaction in this reliability, knowing that his careful maintenance has prepared the tower for nights like this. Every cleaned lens, every oiled gear, every checked connection contributes to this moment of perfect function. In the lamp room, the powerful bulb glows with steady warmth, its light amplified and focused by the Fresnel lens into a beam that can be seen for miles. The rotating mechanism purrs quietly, a mechanical heartbeat that matches the rhythm of Thomas's breathing as he watches over his domain. The hours pass in peaceful vigilance. Thomas moves between his duties with practiced ease, monitoring the light, recording weather observations, ensuring all systems function smoothly. The storm continues its performance outside, but within the lighthouse, there is only calm purpose and the satisfaction of work well done. As dawn begins to light in the eastern horizon, the storm's intensity gradually subsides. The rain softens to a gentle patter, and the wind's voice grows quieter, as if the weather itself is settling into peaceful rest. Thomas extinguishes the beacon as the first rays of sunlight pierce the clearing clouds, painting the wet landscape in shades of gold and silver. The lighthouse has weathered another storm, standing as steady and reliable as ever. Thomas descends the stairs one final time, feeling the deep contentment that comes from a night of faithful service. Outside, the sea continues its eternal motion, now calmed and glittering in the morning light, while the lighthouse rests quietly, ready for whatever the next tide might bring. The first light of dawn filters through the clearing clouds, soft and golden as honey dripping from a spoon. Thomas opens the lighthouse door to find the world transformed. Where yesterday evening brought howling winds and sheets of rain, this morning offers only stillness and the gentle whisper of waves against the rocks below. The air tastes different now, clean and sharp, washed free of dust and heaviness. Each breath fills his lungs with the crisp saltiness of the sea, mixed with the earthy scent of rain-soaked ground. The storm has scrubbed the sky until it gleams pale blue, streaked with wisps of white clouds that drift lazily toward the horizon like sailing ships in no particular hurry. Thomas steps out onto the gallery that circles the lighthouse, his boots clicking softly against the wet iron grating. Droplets of water cling to the railings like tiny prisms, catching the early light and throwing small rainbows across the white-painted walls. He runs his weathered hand along the metal, feeling the cool dampness that speaks of the storm's recent passage. Below him, the sea stretches endlessly, its surface now calm and mirror-bright. The waves that crashed so violently just hours before have settled into a gentle rhythm, rolling toward shore with the lazy confidence of old friends returning home. The water reflects the morning sky so perfectly that it's difficult to tell where sea ends and heaven begins. The lighthouse grounds tell their own story of the night's adventure. Seaweed lies scattered across the path like green ribbons dropped by some ocean fairy. Small pools of rainwater have gathered in the hollows between stones, creating miniature lakes that reflect the brightening sky. A piece of driftwood, polished smooth by countless tides, rests against the garden gate, a gift from the storm's wild dance. Thomas walks slowly around the lighthouse, his movements deliberate and unhurried. There's no urgency now, only the quiet satisfaction of surveying his domain after nature's great show. The beam housing appears intact, its glass panels clean and bright. The beacon that guided ships safely through the storm's fury stands ready to serve again when evening comes. In the small garden where Thomas grows his vegetables, he finds the storm has been both destroyer and benefactor. Some of the taller plants lie bent but not broken, their leaves heavy with collected rainwater. Others stand straighter than before, as if the wind has taught them new strength. The rain barrels overflow with fresh water, a precious gift that will serve him well in the days to come. The old weather vane atop the lighthouse spins slowly now, unable to decide which way the gentle breeze wishes to blow. It turns first east, then west, then settles somewhere between, quivering slightly like a compass needle finding true north. The wind chimes hanging from the gallery sing softly, their bronze notes carrying across the water like a prayer of gratitude. From his vantage point high above the sea, Thomas can see far along the coast. The cliffs stand proudly, their faces washed clean by the storm's tears. Seabirds have returned to their ledges, white shapes dotting the dark rock like scattered blossoms. They call to each other in voices full of relief and celebration, their cries echoing off the stone walls and mixing with the sound of waves. The sun climbs higher, warming Thomas's face and hands. Steam begins to rise from the wet surfaces around him, the lighthouse walls, the iron railings, the wooden bench where he sits each evening to watch the sunset. The world is drying itself, preparing for another perfect day by the sea. A fishing boat appears on the horizon, its red sails bright against the blue morning. Thomas raises his hand in greeting, though he knows the fishermen are too far away to see him. It's a gesture born of long habit and deeper connection. Lighthouse keeper to those who depend on the sea, guardian to the guided, one soul acknowledging another across the vast waters. The storm has passed completely now, leaving behind only memories and the clean smell of rain-washed air. Thomas breathes deeply, filling himself with the peace that follows nature's great tempests. Tonight, when he lights the beacon once more, it will shine through air made crystal clear by the storm's passage, its beam reaching farther than ever across the calm and grateful sea. In this perfect morning silence, broken only by the gentle lap of waves and the distant cry of gulls, Thomas knows that all is well in his small corner of the world. The afternoon sun filters through the lighthouse's radio room window, casting golden rectangles across the worn wooden table where Thomas sits before his equipment. The familiar weight of the microphone feels comfortable in his weathered hands as he adjusts the frequency dial with practiced precision. The radio hums softly to life, its gentle electronic whisper joining the eternal soundtrack of waves below. Every Wednesday at precisely 3 o'clock, Thomas conducts his weekly check-in with the coastal marine station. It is a ritual as dependable as the tides themselves, connecting his solitary world to the vast network of guardians who watch over these waters. The clock on the wall shows 2 minutes before the hour, and Thomas takes a moment to gather his observations, written in his careful script across pages that smell of salt air and dedication. Beacon Point Light to Coastal Marine Station, come in please. He speaks into the microphone, his voice steady and clear. The words travel across invisible pathways, carried on radio waves that arc through the atmosphere above the endless expanse of sea. For a moment, there is only the soft static of the airwaves, like distant rain on water. Then comes the familiar voice of operator Sarah, her words crackling through the speaker with warmth that bridges the miles between them. Coastal Marine Station to Beacon Point Light, we read you loud and clear, Thomas. How are conditions out there today? Her voice carries the comfort of routine, of professionals who understand the sacred duty of watching over those who brave the sea. Thomas glances at his logbook, though he knows the numbers by heart. Weather conditions are fair, visibility 12 nautical miles, winds from the southwest at 8 knots. Light operational at 100%, rotating beacon cycling every 10 seconds. No vessels in distress reported, no unusual maritime activity observed. As he speaks, Thomas can almost see the Coast Guard station in his mind's eye, the radio operator seated at her console, recording his report in official logs that become part of the great tapestry of maritime safety. Each lighthouse keeper, each weather station, each Coast Guard vessel contributes their thread to this invisible web of protection that spans the coastline. Copy that, Beacon Point. Any maintenance issues to report? Sarah's voice maintains its professional cadence, yet Thomas detects the genuine care behind the routine questions. These operators know that lighthouse keepers are more than just reporting stations. They are the solitary sentinels who choose to live between land and sea, guardians of an ancient calling. Negative on maintenance issues, Thomas responds, running his free hand along the smooth surface of his desk. Lens assembly cleaned this morning, fuel reserves at 90%, backup generator tested and operational. All systems green across the board. Through the radio room window, Thomas watches a small fishing vessel make its way along the horizon, its white wake trailing behind like a brushstroke on blue canvas. The boat's presence reminds him why these radio checks matter somewhere out there. Fishermen and sailors depend on the network of lights and voices that guide them safely home. The radio check is more than administrative routine. It is the lighthouse keeper's way of saying, "I am here, I am watching, the light will not fail." Excellent work as always, Thomas. Any supply requests for the monthly run? The monthly supply boat brings fresh provisions, mail, and the occasional visitor to break the lighthouse's peaceful solitude. Thomas considers his store's canned goods lined up in neat rows, fresh water tanks filled by recent rain, propane reserves adequate for another month of cooking and heating. Standard provisions should suffice, Sarah. Weather's been kind to us lately. Thomas pauses, listening to the familiar sounds of his lighthouse home, the gentle creak of wooden beams, the distant cry of seabirds, the rhythmic pulse of waves against rock. These sounds form the symphony of his solitary life, a melody he has grown to treasure. Copy that. Anything else to report, Beacon Point? Thomas looks around his radio room, where maritime charts cover the walls and nautical instruments gleam in their appointed places. Through the window, the afternoon light begins its slow transformation toward evening gold. Soon, he will climb the spiral stairs to tend the great lens, ensuring its beam continues its eternal dance across the waters. The thought fills him with quiet satisfaction. Nothing further to report. Coastal Marine Station. Beacon Point Light maintaining watch as always. Understood, Thomas. Thank you for your service. Same time next week. Wouldn't miss it, Sarah. Beacon Point Light out. The radio falls silent except for its gentle static whisper. Thomas sets down the microphone and updates his logbook with neat, precise handwriting. Another successful radio check, another link forged in the chain of maritime safety. Outside, the sea continues its eternal conversation with the shore, and the lighthouse stands ready to offer its guidance when darkness comes calling once again. The first breath of autumn arrives not with fanfare, but with whispers, subtle changes that only those who live closely with the rhythms of the sea can truly perceive. Thomas feels it in the way the morning light slants differently through his kitchen window, casting longer shadows across the worn wooden table where he sits with his steaming cup of coffee. The angle has shifted almost imperceptibly, but his lighthouse keeper's eye catches what others might miss. Outside, the ocean stretches endlessly toward the horizon, its surface painted in shades of deep blue and silver. But there's something different about the quality of light today, a golden warmth that wasn't there just a week ago, as if nature has begun to filter the sun through amber glass. The harsh, brilliant white of summer has softened into something richer, more forgiving. Thomas steps onto the gallery that encircles the lighthouse, his weathered hands gripping the iron railing as he breathes in the salt-tinged air. The wind carries new scents now, not just the familiar brine and seaweed, but something earthier, more complex. It speaks of leaves beginning their slow transformation somewhere inland, of harvests and gathering, of the great wheel of seasons turning once again. High above, the first messengers of autumn begin their ancient journey. A V formation of Canada geese cuts across the morning sky, their honking calls drifting down like messages from another world. Thomas watches them with the satisfaction of a man who has witnessed this miracle 47 times before, yet still finds wonder in its perfect timing. Nature's calendar is more reliable than any human timepiece. More birds follow throughout the morning, smaller songbirds in loose flocks, riding the gentle thermals that rise from the sun-warmed rocks below. Thomas knows their names, their habits, their destinations. The yellow warblers will travel thousands of miles to Central America. The ruby-throated hummingbirds, no bigger than his thumb, will somehow find the strength to cross the Gulf of Mexico in a single, impossible flight. As the day progresses, he notices other subtle shifts. The tide pools, which just yesterday seemed to shimmer with the endless energy of summer, now reflect the sky with a deeper, more contemplative quality. The seagrass sways differently in the breeze, still green, but with hints of gold creeping in at the edges. Even the lighthouse itself seems to sense the change, its white tower standing a bit more stately against the shifting sky. By afternoon, Thomas has climbed to the lamp room to begin his seasonal preparations. The nights are growing longer now, requiring him to light the beacon earlier each evening. He runs his hands over the massive Fresnel lens, checking each prismatic surface for salt residue or scratches that might diminish the light's power. Soon, the autumn storms will begin their visits, and ships will depend more heavily on this beacon to guide them safely home. The lamp room offers a perfect vantage point for observing the day's transformation. To the west, where the sun will set earlier tonight than it did yesterday, clouds gather in loose formations, not the towering thunderheads of summer, but gentler, more artistic shapes that seem painted across the canvas of sky. The light filters through them in cathedral rays, each beam visible in the slight haze that autumn mornings bring. Thomas adjusts the lighthouse's automated timer, his movements practiced and sure. 47 years of this ritual have made it second nature. Yet he approaches each seasonal transition with the same careful attention he gave as a young man. The sea demands respect, and respect requires vigilance. The storms that will come with the deeper autumn will test both the lighthouse and its keeper. But for now, there is this gentle transition, this peaceful preparation. As evening approaches, the first of the autumn sunsets begins to unfold. The sun, lower in the sky than it was at this hour just weeks ago, casts a golden path across the water that seems to stretch directly from the horizon to the rocks below the lighthouse. The light has weight to it now, substance and warmth that makes the very air glow. Thomas lights the beacon as twilight settles over the sea, its powerful beams sweeping across waters that are beginning their own seasonal shift toward deeper blues and grays. The light catches on the wings of late-flying gulls, illuminates the spray from a distant fishing boat heading home with the day's catch. Standing in the lamp room as full darkness finally claims the sky, Thomas feels the satisfaction of another day properly ended, another season properly welcomed. The lighthouse beam continues its eternal rotation, a steady heartbeat against the growing night, ready for whatever autumn storms may come, guided by the quiet wisdom of seasons and the keeper who tends their ancient rhythms. The morning mist clings to the lighthouse grounds like a gentle embrace, and Thomas feels the familiar tingle of cool air against his weathered hands as he steps into his garden. October has arrived with its quiet promise of change, and the first frost warnings have been whispered by the wind for days now. Today, he knows, is the day to gather what remains of his summer's labor before winter claims the last of his tender plants. His boots crunch softly on the gravel path that winds between the raised beds he built with driftwood and stones collected from countless beach walks. The garden spreads before him in neat rows, a testament to months of careful tending in this harsh coastal environment. Salt spray and fierce winds might challenge most gardeners, but Thomas has learned to work with the sea rather than against it, creating windbreaks from beach grass and choosing hardy varieties that thrive in sandy soil. The tomato plants, heavy with their final offering, bow gracefully under the weight of fruit that ranges from deep crimson to pale green. Thomas moves methodically down the row, his canvas basket growing heavier with each vine he visits. These are the San Marzanos he started from seed on his kitchen windowsill back in February, when winter storms still rattled the lighthouse walls and spring felt impossibly distant. Now their sweet fragrance mingles with the salt air, creating a scent that speaks of home and harvest. He pauses at a particularly laden plant, its branches so heavy they've begun to lean against the wooden stakes he drove into the earth months ago. The largest tomatoes will go straight to his kitchen for immediate use, thick slices for his evening sandwich, chunks for the hearty stews that will warm him through the coming months. But most of these beauties are destined for preservation, to capture summer's essence in glass jars that will line his pantry shelves like glowing rubies. Moving to the cucumber trellis, Thomas admires the climbing vines that have transformed his simple wooden frame into a living wall of green. The cucumbers hang like pale lanterns among the broad leaves, some perfectly sized for eating fresh, others grown large and seedy perfect for the sweet pickle recipe his grandmother taught him decades ago. He remembers her patient hands guiding his small fingers as they packed cucumbers into jars, the kitchen filled with the sharp, clean scent of vinegar and the warm spice of dill. The herb garden draws him next, and here his movements become even more reverent. Basil plants, their leaves still glossy despite the cooling nights, release their peppery perfume with each gentle touch. He harvests stem by stem, knowing that tonight he'll hang these bundles from the rafters in his cottage, where they'll slowly surrender their moisture to become the dried herbs that will season his winter meals. The oregano has gone to flower, its tiny white blossoms attracting the last of the season's bees, and Thomas waits patiently for them to finish their work before he begins his careful cutting. Sage leaves, silvery and soft, feel like velvet between his fingers. This ancient herb has grown wild near the lighthouse for as long as anyone can remember, but Thomas has cultivated his own patch, encouraging the plants with compost made from seaweed and kitchen scraps. The thyme has spread beyond its original boundaries, creeping between stones and filling the air with its subtle fragrance whenever his footsteps brush against it. As the morning progresses, Thomas's movements settle into the comfortable rhythm of harvest. Fill the basket, empty it in the cottage, return to the garden. Each trip reveals new treasures: a handful of cherry tomatoes still warm from the early sun, sprigs of parsley so fresh they seem to glow green, late-blooming nasturtiums whose peppery flowers will add color to his salads. The carrots come up from the sandy soil with surprising ease, their orange shoulders emerging first, then the long, tapered roots that have grown sweet in the coastal conditions. Some will go straight to his root cellar, nestled in boxes of sand where they'll keep fresh well into winter. Others he'll roast with herbs, their natural sugars caramelizing in the heat of his old oven. By afternoon, Thomas's cottage kitchen has been transformed into a bustling workshop of preservation. Steam rises from pots of simmering tomatoes, destined to become rich sauce and paste. Cucumber spears rest in salt brine, beginning their transformation into the pickles that will provide bright, tangy contrast to winter's heavier fare. Herb bundles hang from every available hook and beam, slowly drying in the warm air. As the sun begins its descent toward the horizon, Thomas steps back into his garden one final time. The beds, now mostly cleared, look ready for their winter rest, but the satisfaction of a successful harvest fills him with quiet contentment. Here, beside the endless sea, he has created abundance from simple seeds and patient care. Tonight, as the lighthouse beam sweeps across the waves, his pantry shelves will hold the captured essence of summer, ready to sustain him through whatever weather the seasons may bring. The autumn night had settled into its familiar rhythm around the lighthouse when Thomas first noticed the unusual glow creeping across the northern horizon. He paused in his evening routine of checking the beacon's oil reservoir, drawn to the window by something his weathered eyes had never witnessed in all his years by this southern coast. A faint shimmer danced at the edge of the sky, like moonlight caught in distant clouds, yet the moon hung clearly visible in the opposite direction. Thomas set down his oil can with careful precision and stepped outside onto the gallery that circled the lighthouse's crown. The salt-tinged air carried the whisper of gentle waves against the rocks below, and somewhere in the darkness, a night bird called its soft, questioning note across the water. The glow intensified slowly, spreading wider across the northern sky, like watercolors bleeding into wet paper. Thomas had heard tales from visiting sailors, stories of lights that painted the heavens in lands far to the north, but he had always imagined them as sailors' fables, embellished with each telling. Now, as ribbons of pale green began to unfurl across the star-scattered darkness, he understood that some wonders existed beyond the reach of imagination. The aurora moved with the fluid grace of underwater kelp swaying in ocean currents. Bands of emerald light stretched and contracted, pulsing with an otherworldly rhythm that seemed to breathe with the very heartbeat of the earth itself. Thomas found himself holding his breath, afraid that any sound might disturb this celestial dance. A thought occurred to him then, one that would have seemed sacrilegious during any other night of his faithful service. The lighthouse beacon, with its steady golden beams sweeping across the water, might be washing out the subtle colors of this ethereal display. For 27 years, he had never extinguished that light except for maintenance, never allowed darkness to claim the waters he was sworn to illuminate. But this night felt different, touched by something sacred and rare. With reverent care, Thomas descended the spiral stairs and adjusted the beacon's mechanism, gradually reducing its intensity until only a soft glow remained, enough to mark the lighthouse's presence for any vessel that might chance by, but dim enough not to compete with nature's own illumination. Then he climbed back to his vantage point and waited. The transformation was breathtaking. As his eyes adjusted to the deeper darkness, the aurora revealed itself in full splendor. Curtains of green light now danced with ribbons of blue and the faintest hints of purple, hanging like cosmic silk scarves across the vault of heaven. The lights pulsed and shimmered, sometimes bright enough to cast shadows on the gallery's weathered planking, sometimes fading to whispers of color that required the softest focus to perceive. The sea below had become a mirror for this celestial theater. Every wave that caught the aurora's glow sparkled with reflected green fire, as if the water itself had become liquid light. Thomas watched, mesmerized, as the colors painted themselves across the surface of his familiar ocean, transforming it into something magical and strange. He thought of all the keepers who had stood watch before him and all who would come after. How many of them would witness such a sight? The aurora borealis visiting these southern waters was like a messenger from distant lands, carrying whispers of icy fjords and endless polar nights, of places where such displays were common as summer rain. A seal surfaced in the lighthouse's shallow beam, its dark head turning upward as if it too sensed the wonder spreading across the sky. For a moment, keeper and seal shared the same upward gaze, both witnesses to this rare gift from the heavens. The seal's breathing made soft, puffing sounds in the still air before it slipped beneath the waves once more, leaving barely a ripple to mark its passage. The lights continued their slow dance for what felt like hours, but might have been minutes. Time seemed suspended beneath the aurora's spell. Thomas found himself remembering childhood nights when he would lie in meadow grass, watching for shooting stars and wondering about the vastness beyond the visible world. This felt like an answer to those childhood questions, a reminder that wonder still existed in a universe far stranger and more beautiful than any young imagination could grasp. As the display gradually softened and faded, retreating toward the northern horizon like a tide of light returning to its celestial source, Thomas carefully restored the beacon to its full brightness. The familiar golden beam resumed its steady sweep across the water, a faithful guardian once more. But something had changed in those quiet moments of darkness and light. The lighthouse felt less solitary now, connected to the greater mysteries that painted themselves across the turning sky, part of a larger story written in starlight and aurora fire. The first hints of autumn's end drift through the salt-tinged air as Thomas makes his way up the winding stone steps of the lighthouse, his weathered hands trailing along the familiar iron railing. The ocean stretches endlessly before him, its surface catching the pale morning light like scattered silver coins. Soon, these same waters will turn gray and restless, whipped by winter's fierce breath, but for now they hold the gentle rhythm of late fall. Thomas has lived through 37 winters in this lighthouse, and each one has taught him the sacred importance of preparation. The sea does not forgive those who wait too long, who assume they have more time than the calendar allows. Today, as the wind carries the faint scent of distant snow, He begins the ritual that will keep both him and his beacon safe through the months ahead. In the lamp room at the lighthouse's crown, Thomas runs his fingers along the brass fittings of the great lens, checking for any signs of wear or damage. The Fresnel lens, a masterpiece of curved glass and precise engineering, must remain perfect. During winter storms, when visibility drops to mere yards, this lens will be the difference between ships finding safe harbor and losing their way in the darkness. He polishes each section with methodical care, his cloth moving in slow, deliberate circles, removing even the smallest speck of salt spray. The heating system draws his attention next. Thomas descends to the equipment room, where the old cast-iron furnace sits like a slumbering giant. He opens its heavy door and peers inside, inspecting the firebox for cracks or blockages. The familiar smell of cold metal and old ash fills his nostrils as he runs his hands along the thick iron walls, feeling for any weakness that winter's demands might exploit. Satisfied, he moves to check the network of pipes that will carry warmth throughout the tower, ensuring each joint is tight, each valve turns smoothly. Outside, the wind is picking up, carrying with it the sharp bite that speaks of storms gathering far out at sea. Thomas walks the perimeter of the lighthouse grounds, his boots crunching on fallen leaves that have blown in from the mainland. The small outbuildings that house his supplies need attention too. He checks the door seals on his fuel storage shed, making sure no moisture can creep in to contaminate the oil that feeds his beacon. Each barrel is examined, rolled slightly to check for rust or damage, then carefully returned to its precise position. The generator that provides backup power receives the same thorough inspection. Thomas has seen too many winters where the main power failed, leaving only this mechanical heartbeat to keep the light alive. He tests the engine, listening to its steady rumble with the trained ear of someone who knows every sound it should make. The fuel lines are checked, the filters examined, the battery connections cleaned until they shine like new copper. As afternoon settles over the lighthouse, Thomas climbs to his living quarters to prepare his own winter sanctuary. He checks the seals around his windows, pressing his palm against the glass to feel for any drafts that might steal precious warmth during the long, cold nights ahead. Extra blankets are pulled from storage, their wool heavy and comforting in his hands. Canned goods are inventoried, tea supplies counted, books arranged within easy reach of his favorite reading chair. The wireless radio that connects him to the mainland receives careful attention. During severe storms, this device becomes his lifeline to the outside world, carrying weather warnings and emergency communications. He tests each frequency, adjusts the antenna, and ensures the backup battery system will keep it running even if all other power fails. The crackling voices that emerge from the speaker are reassuring, confirmation that he remains connected to the world beyond his isolated tower. As evening approaches, Thomas makes one final inspection of his domain. He walks slowly around the lighthouse gallery, checking the protective railings and examining the exterior walls for any loose stones or damaged mortar that winter's fury might exploit. The beacon's rotation mechanism receives a few drops of oil, its gears turning with smooth precision that will carry it through countless dark nights ahead. Standing at the lighthouse's base as twilight settles over the sea, Thomas looks up at his tower with quiet satisfaction. Every system has been checked, every potential weakness addressed, every preparation made with the care of someone who understands that in winter's grip, attention to detail becomes a matter of survival. The lighthouse stands ready, a sentinel prepared to face whatever storms the coming months may bring. The first stars are beginning to appear in the darkening sky as Thomas lights the beacon for another night. Soon, these same stars will shine down on a world transformed by winter's touch. But tonight, there is only the peaceful satisfaction of work well done and preparations complete. The morning mist clung to the water like a gentle veil when Thomas first spotted her on the horizon. Through the salt-stained glass of his lighthouse window, something had caught his eye, a speck of white that didn't belong to the seabirds or the foam of distant waves. He reached for his telescope, the brass instrument worn smooth by decades of faithful service, and focused the lens with practiced precision. There she was, a tall ship, her three masts reaching toward the pewter sky like cathedral spires. Her sails, brilliant white against the autumn gray, billowed full with the steady wind that had been blowing from the southwest for 3 days now. Thomas drew in a slow breath, hardly believing what he was seeing. In all his years tending this lighthouse, such vessels had become as rare as shooting stars. The ship moved with a grace that spoke of another era, when the ocean highways carried these majestic vessels to every corner of the world. Her hull cut through the swells with purposeful elegance, rising and falling in rhythm with the sea's eternal dance. Thomas watched transfixed as she drew closer to his stretch of coast. The morning light caught her sails, illuminating them like great wings carrying dreams across the water. Through his telescope, he could make out the intricate network of rigging that connected her masts, a spider's web of rope and tackle that sailors once climbed with the agility of acrobats. The sight stirred something deep in Thomas's chest, a longing for adventures he had only imagined through the stories of old mariners who had once sought shelter in the cove below his lighthouse. He wondered about her crews. Were they young adventurers following the call of the sea? Perhaps descendants of the great sailing families, keeping ancient traditions alive on the changing tides. Or maybe they were simply souls like himself, drawn to the honest work of wind and wave, choosing the harder path because it led to something pure and true. The ship's bow cut through a particularly large swell, sending spray dancing in crystalline arcs that caught the strengthening sunlight. Thomas imagined he could hear the creak of her timbers, the snap of canvas in the wind, the calls of sailors adjusting her course. These sounds lived in his memory from the stories told by weathered captains who had once warmed themselves by his fire during fierce winter storms. As she passed his lighthouse, close enough now that he could see the details of her construction, Thomas noticed how lovingly she had been maintained. Her paintwork gleamed, her brass fittings caught the light like golden coins, and every line of rigging appeared taut and purposeful. This was no museum piece being carefully nursed along. This was a living ship, breathing with the wind, drinking from the sea as her ancestors had done for centuries. The ship began to turn slightly, adjusting her heading for some distant port. Thomas watched her profile change as she came about, her sails shifting and filling anew. He imagined her destination, perhaps a harbor where cobblestone streets ran down to wooden piers, where the scent of salt air mixed with coffee and spices from distant lands. Or maybe she sailed toward islands he had only seen on charts, places where palm trees swayed and crystal waters lapped at coral shores. The autumn wind seemed to sing through her rigging as she passed, carrying with it the whispers of 1,000 voyages. Thomas found himself remembering his grandfather's stories of the merchant fleets that once crowded these waters, their holds filled with cargo from every continent. Tea from China, silk from the Orient, precious woods from tropical forests, all carried in vessels not unlike this one. As the tall ship continued her journey, growing smaller on the horizon, Thomas felt a profound sense of gratitude. In a world increasingly dominated by engines and schedules, here was proof that some still chose the patient path of sail and wind. The ship represented continuity, a bridge between the maritime past and an uncertain future. The sun had climbed higher now, burning away the last wisps of morning mist. The tall ship had become a distant silhouette, her white sails mere flecks against the endless blue. But Thomas knew he would carry this moment with him, adding it to his treasury of ocean memories. Tonight, when he lit the beacon that had guided countless vessels safely home, he would think of her crew somewhere out there, following their own ancient navigation among the stars. He lowered his telescope and smiled, his heart full of the simple joy that comes from witnessing something truly beautiful. The sea had given him another gift, a reminder that adventure and wonder still sailed the world's waters, as timeless as the tides themselves. The autumn wind carries a different song now, one that speaks of longer nights and the deep contentment that comes with settling into the rhythm of shorter days. Thomas climbs the spiral stairs of his lighthouse tower, his weathered hands carrying a leather-bound collection of maritime tales and a small oil lamp that casts dancing shadows on the curved stone walls. The lamp's flame flickers gently as he reaches his favorite reading nook, a cushioned alcove built into the tower's thick walls, positioned perfectly to catch both the warmth from the hearth below and the mesmerizing view of the darkening sea. Outside, the beacon rotates with its steady, reassuring pulse, painting the waves in sweeps of golden light that stretch far into the night. Thomas settles into his well-worn chair, the leather creaking softly as he adjusts the lamp beside him. The oil burns clean and bright, filling the small space with a warm, honey-colored glow that seems to hold back not just the darkness, but the bite of the autumn air. He opens his book carefully, the binding crackling with the familiar sound of pages that have been turned countless times before. The first story draws him in immediately, a tale of lighthouse keepers from generations past, men and women who tended these coastal guardians through storms and calm alike. As Thomas reads, his own lighthouse seems to listen, the building settling around him with small groans and sighs that have become as familiar as his own breathing. The words on the page speak of keepers who climbed these same stairs, who watched these same waters, who found solace in the steady rhythm of tending their light. Below him, the fire in the hearth crackles with quiet satisfaction, the sound drifting up through the tower like a gentle conversation between old friends. Thomas pauses in his reading to listen to this symphony of comfort, the soft whisper of turning pages, the occasional pop and hiss from the burning logs, the eternal murmur of waves meeting the rocky shore far below. The oil lamp beside him burns with perfect steadiness, its flame dancing only slightly in the draft that sneaks through the tower's ancient stones. The light falls across the pages in warm pools, making the words seem to glow with their own inner fire. Thomas runs his finger along the lines as he reads, a habit from childhood that has never left him, connecting him more deeply to each story. Outside, the night deepens gradually, the way autumn nights do, not with the sudden drop of winter darkness, but with a slow, gentle settling that feels like the earth itself exhaling after a long day. The lighthouse beacon continues its faithful rotation, and Thomas finds himself reading in rhythm with its sweep, pausing when the light passes his window, continuing when it moves on to warn the ships beyond. The story he's reading tells of a keeper's wife who kept a garden on the cliff top, how she would bring fresh herbs and flowers into the tower to brighten the long winter months. Thomas smiles, thinking of his own small attempts at gardening, the hardy plants that survive the salt spray and constant wind. There's something deeply satisfying about these connections across time, these shared experiences of life by the sea. The oil in his lamp burns lower, but there's no urgency in its dwindling. Thomas knows exactly how long it will last, has gauged it perfectly for his evening's reading. The flame grows slightly smaller but more concentrated, creating an even more intimate circle of light around his chair and book. As he turns another page, a particularly strong gust of wind rattles the windows gently, reminding him of the weather building outside. But here in his tower, surrounded by thick stone walls and warmed by fire and lamplight, the storm feels distant and unthreatening. It's simply another voice in the nighttime chorus, wind and waves and crackling fire, the soft whisper of pages and the steady pulse of his beacon above. The stories flow one into another, each tale adding to the deep sense of belonging that fills the lighthouse tower. Thomas reads of storms weathered and ships guided safely home, of quiet nights like this one when the sea rests peacefully and the light burns steady and true. The oil lamp flickers once, twice, then settles back into its steady glow, as if reminding him to savor these moments of perfect contentment. Outside, the autumn night deepens, and somewhere beyond the horizon, ships follow the beacon's light towards safe harbor, guided by the same steady pulse that marks the rhythm of Thomas's peaceful evening. In this tower of light and stone, surrounded by stories and warmed by fire, time moves with the gentle pace of turning pages and the eternal rhythm of waves below. The morning arrives with an unusual stillness, as if the world has paused to hold its breath. From his kitchen window, Thomas watches the sky, a canvas of pewter gray that seems to press down upon the sea. The air carries that particular weight that speaks of change, of nature preparing to transform the landscape once again. He has felt this before, many times over his decades tending the lighthouse, and his weathered hands instinctively reach for his warmest wool sweater. By noon, the first drops begin to fall. Not quite rain, not quite snow, but something in between that taps gently against the lighthouse windows like nature's own Morse code. Thomas moves through his afternoon routine with practiced calm, checking the beacon mechanism, testing the backup systems, ensuring the fuel reserves are topped off. He has learned to trust these subtle warnings the sky provides, these whispered promises of what is to come. As evening approaches, the tapping becomes more insistent. The droplets freeze the moment they touch any surface, creating a thin, crystal film over the lighthouse railings and the rocky path that leads to the shore. Thomas steps outside to inspect the growing ice, his boots finding careful purchase on the increasingly slick stones. The beam from his lighthouse already begins to cast prismatic rainbows through the forming ice crystals, turning the familiar landscape into something from a winter fairy tale. The storm arrives with the darkness, not as a violent assault but as a patient craftsman, methodically coating everything in layer upon layer of clear ice. From his position in the lighthouse lamp room, Thomas watches the world transform. The jagged cliffs become smooth sculptures of frozen glass. The railings of his walkway grow thick with ice, resembling the intricate latticework of a master jeweler. Even the lighthouse itself begins to wear this crystal armor, each pane of glass in the lamp room acquiring its own delicate coating of ice. But Thomas has faced such storms before, and his movements remain steady and purposeful. From a special cabinet, he retrieves tools that have served him well through many such nights. A small torch with a concentrated flame, wooden scrapers worn smooth by years of use, and thick canvas mitts that allow him to work while protecting his hands from the bitter cold. He knows that the beacon must continue to shine, that somewhere out on the dark water, ships depend on its light to guide them safely through the night. Working section by section, Thomas carefully clears the ice from the lamp room windows. The flame from his torch hisses softly as it meets the ice, sending tiny rivulets of water streaming down the glass. Steam rises in delicate spirals, quickly dissipating in the cold air. He works with the patience of a man who understands that rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes in weather like this can prove costly. Each pane is cleared methodically, lovingly, as if he were polishing precious gems. The ice continues to accumulate on the lighthouse exterior, creating a shell that catches and refracts the beacon's light in extraordinary ways. The usual golden beam now fractures into countless sparkles of color, blues and greens and silvers that dance across the ice-covered landscape like aurora borealis brought down to earth. Thomas pauses in his work to marvel at this unexpected beauty, this transformation of his familiar world into something magical and ethereal. Throughout the night, he maintains his vigilant routine, checking the beacon every hour, clearing ice from critical surfaces, ensuring that the light continues its steady rotation. The storm wraps around the lighthouse like a cold embrace, but within the lamp room, Thomas works in warmth and purpose. The rhythmic sweep of the beacon creates a hypnotic pattern of light and shadow, a gentle pulse that seems to keep time with his own heartbeat. As dawn approaches, the ice storm begins to exhaust itself, the steady accumulation gradually slowing to occasional droplets. Thomas makes one final check of the beacon, satisfied that it has remained constant throughout the night's trial. The lighthouse stands encased in its crystal shell, still proud, still functional, still serving its eternal purpose of guiding travelers safely home. He descends the spiral stairs slowly, his work complete for now. Through the ice-clouded windows, he can see the first pale hints of sunrise beginning to touch the horizon. The world has been transformed overnight into a landscape of impossible beauty, every surface gleaming like polished crystal, every familiar shape made new and wondrous by winter's artistry. In his kitchen, Thomas prepares his morning tea, listening to the gentle creaking of ice beginning to shift and settle as the day warms. Soon, this crystal palace will begin to melt, returning the lighthouse and cliffs to their familiar forms. But for now, in this quiet morning light, he sits surrounded by winter's masterpiece, the beacon above continuing its faithful sweep across the crystalline seascape, undaunted and eternal. The December wind carries a different song tonight, softer somehow, as if even the sea knows that Christmas has come to the lighthouse. Thomas stands at his kitchen window, watching the last of the daylight fade into deep purple over the water. The waves roll in with their endless rhythm, but there's something peaceful in their sound tonight, a gentleness that speaks of quiet celebration. He turns to the small evergreen tree that sits in the corner of his living room, no taller than his shoulder, yet perfect in every way. He'd found it growing wild among the rocks last week, sturdy and fragrant, shaped by the coastal winds into something beautifully asymmetrical. Now it stands decorated with simple ornaments he's collected over the years, pieces of sea glass worn smooth by the waves, small shells with mother-of-pearl interiors, and a few brass buttons from his old naval uniform that catch the lamplight like tiny golden stars. The fire in his stone hearth crackles warmly, sending dancing shadows across the whitewashed walls. Thomas has strung dried kelp around the mantelpiece, its deep green fronds creating garlands that smell of ocean and earth. Beside the hearth, his grandfather's old leather chair sits ready, a wool blanket folded neatly across its arm, waiting for the evening's quiet contemplation. In the kitchen, something wonderful is happening. A small chicken roasts slowly in his cast-iron pot, seasoned with wild herbs he's gathered from the cliff tops, thyme and rosemary that taste of salt air and sunshine. Sweet potatoes nestle around the bird, their skins beginning to caramelize, and he's prepared a simple pudding made with dried fruits that arrived on the supply boat last month. The aromas fill the lighthouse with warmth, creating an atmosphere of abundance despite the solitude. As the evening deepens, Thomas climbs the spiral stairs to the lamp room, his boots echoing softly on the iron steps. The great lens is already turning, casting its steady beam across the dark water, but tonight he has something special planned. He's calculated the timing carefully, waiting for the moment when the passenger steamer from the mainland will pass on its Christmas evening route. There, a warm cluster of lights appears on the horizon, growing brighter as the ship approaches. Through his telescope, Thomas can see the decorated deck, tiny figures moving about in celebration, windows glowing with golden light. As the vessel draws closer to his lighthouse's range, something magical happens. The ship's lights begin to flash in a deliberate pattern, 3 long, 3 short, 3 long again. The international signal for attention, but tonight it carries the warmth of holiday greeting. Thomas feels a deep smile spread across his weathered face. He moves to the lighthouse controls with practiced hands and begins his response. The great beam flashes in careful rhythm, long, short, long, short, long, long, long. Then again, slower this time, painting patterns of light across the water. He's spelling out Merry Christmas in Morse code, letter by letter, the lighthouse beacon becoming a maritime Christmas carol written in luminous script across the darkness. The ship responds with a joyful sequence of all its lights flashing at once, then settling into a gentle pattern that speaks of gratitude and shared celebration. Other vessels appear, a fishing boat returning late from the grounds, a cargo ship bound for distant ports. One by one, they join the conversation of light, each adding their own greeting to the symphony of illumination playing across the winter sea. For 20 minutes, the ocean becomes a stage for this wordless celebration. Ships pass their messages of goodwill through the darkness, and Thomas orchestrates from his lighthouse, the great lens spinning and flashing, conducting this chorus of maritime Christmas cheer. The salt air seems to shimmer with connection, with the knowledge that even in the vast loneliness of the sea, no one celebrates truly alone. As the ships continue on their journeys and their lights fade into the distance, Thomas returns the lighthouse beam to its steady rotation. He descends the stairs slowly, savoring the warmth that fills him, not just from the fire below, but from this moment of communion with fellow travelers on the water. In his kitchen, he carves the golden chicken and fills his plate with the simple feast he's prepared. He carries it to his grandfather's chair by the fire, where he'll dine in contentment, listening to the gentle conversation between wind and waves outside his windows. The Christmas tree stands quietly in its corner, sea glass ornaments catching the firelight, while outside his lighthouse beam continues its faithful watch, sending steady messages of safety and welcome into the holy darkness of Christmas night. The keeper's year has brought him to this moment of perfect solitude that feels not lonely, but complete. A celebration measured not in noise and crowds, but in the quiet satisfaction of duty well done and light well tended. The winter solstice arrives with a hush that seems to settle over the entire coast, as if the world itself is holding its breath at the turning point of the year. Thomas makes his way up the spiraling stone steps of the lighthouse, each footfall echoing softly in the familiar rhythm that has marked his days for decades. The metal railing feels cold beneath his weathered palm, and he pauses at the lamp room door, key in hand, listening to the distant murmur of waves against the rocky shore below. Tonight, the darkness will stretch longer than any other night of the year, and with it comes a weight of responsibility that Thomas feels in his bones. The great lens awaits him, its crystalline facets catching the last pale threads of daylight that filter through the windows. He moves with the measured precision of countless evenings, lighting the oil lamp at the heart of the beacon, watching as the flame springs to life and begins its eternal dance. The light spreads outward, cutting through the gathering dusk like a sword of hope thrust into the belly of winter. Thomas adjusts the mechanism with gentle hands, setting the lens to its slow, hypnotic rotation. Each sweep illuminates a different section of the darkening sea, revealing white-capped waves that rise and fall in ancient patterns, unchanged since long before his grandfather first tended this same light. He settles into his worn wooden chair, the one his wife Sarah had insisted he bring up here years ago when she noticed him standing through entire watches, stubbornly refusing to admit that age was creeping into his joints. The leather cushion bears the impression of countless vigils, molded to his frame through seasons of watching and waiting. Tonight feels different, though heavier with meaning, rich with the accumulated weight of memory. In the dancing glow of the beacon, Thomas opens the leather-bound logbook that rests on the small table beside him. The pages whisper as he turns them, each entry a small chapter in the year's story. March 15th guided the merchant vessel Aurora through the fog bank that had clung to the coast for 3 days. May 22nd watched the fishing fleet return with their nets full of silver, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. July 8th stood witness to the most spectacular sunset he had seen in 30 years of keeping this light. The entries continue, marking storms weathered and ships guided safely home. Each notation represents lives protected, families reunited, cargo delivered to distant ports. Thomas runs his finger along the careful script of his handwriting, remembering the faces of sailors who had waved their gratitude as they passed the lighthouse, their vessels dancing safely through treacherous waters. Outside, the wind picks up, singing its low song through the iron framework of the beacon. It carries with it the scent of winter, sharp and clean, tinged with the salt that has flavored every breath Thomas has taken for more than 4 decades. He rises from his chair and walks to the windows, pressing his palm against the cold glass, feeling the vibration of the wind's touch. The sea stretches endlessly before him, a dark canvas punctuated by the rhythmic sweep of his light. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of his beacon's glow, ships move through the night, their crews trusting in the ancient network of lighthouse keepers who stand sentinel along dangerous coasts. The thought fills Thomas with a quiet satisfaction, the deep contentment that comes from work that matters, from duty faithfully performed. He thinks of Sarah, warm in their cottage below, probably reading by the fire with their old cat Mercury curled in her lap. She understands the sacred nature of these long watches, has never once complained about the nights when duty calls him away from her side. Tomorrow, when the shortest day gives way to slowly lengthening light, she will climb the stairs with hot soup and fresh bread, staying to share the first dawn of winter's retreat. The beacon continues its steady rotation, casting its protective glow across the waters. Thomas returns to his chair, pulling a wool blanket around his shoulders, settling in for the long watch ahead. Through the remainder of this longest night, he will maintain his vigil, ensuring that the light never fails, that hope continues to shine across the darkening waters. In the gentle rhythm of the turning lens, in the steady glow that reaches across the waves, Thomas finds a deep peace. This is his calling, his gift to the world, to stand guard through the darkness, to keep the light burning, to guide weary travelers safely home through whatever storms may come. The first light of the new year touches the horizon like a whisper of gold across the endless water. Thomas stands at the gallery rail of his lighthouse, wrapped in his heavy wool coat, watching as the darkness slowly gives way to the gentlest blush of dawn. The sea stretches before him in perfect stillness, its surface barely disturbed by the softest of swells that catch and hold the early light like scattered coins. This morning feels different somehow, not just because the calendar has turned its page, but because there's something in the air itself, a sense of fresh beginnings, of possibilities yet to unfold. The salt breeze carries with it the promise that each day from now, until midsummer, will gift them a few more precious minutes of daylight. Winter's grip is beginning to loosen, so gradually that only someone who watches the sky as carefully as Thomas would notice. He breathes deeply, tasting the familiar tang of brine and seaweed, the crisp edge of winter air that still holds the night's chill. Below him, the waves lap gently against the rocky foundation of his tower, a rhythm as constant and comforting as his own heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, a gull calls, the first voice of the new year besides his own quiet breathing. The sun climbs higher now, painting the clouds in shades of coral and amber. Thomas pulls his logbook from his coat pocket, its leather binding worn smooth by countless hands over countless years. Today marks not just a new entry, but an entirely fresh volume. The old book, filled with a year's worth of weather observations, ship sightings, and quiet reflections, now rests complete on his shelf upstairs. He opens to the first pristine page and carefully writes the date in his steady hand. January 1st, New Year's Day. Below it, he notes the time of sunrise, the wind direction, gentle from the southwest, and the sea conditions. Calm, he writes, as calm as glass. But it's more than just meteorological data he's recording. It's the beginning of another chapter in the long story of this lighthouse, another year in the endless cycle of seasons by the sea. Back inside the warmth of his quarters, Thomas moves to his small desk where two calendars await his attention. One marks the phases of the moon, its margins already filled with his careful calculations of when the tides will run highest, when the spring storms are most likely to arrive. The other tracks the movement of the sun itself, the slow dance of light and shadow that governs the rhythm of his days. He turns the pages slowly, savoring the clean emptiness of the months ahead. February with its fierce storms and sudden squalls. March, when the first brave flowers will push through the soil of his tiny garden. April's gentle rains and the return of the migrating birds. May's soft warmth and the emergence of seals on the distant rocks. Each month holds its own gifts, its own challenges, its own quiet beauties. The lighthouse itself seems to settle around him with a soft sigh, as if it too is preparing for the year ahead. The great lens overhead catches the strengthening sunlight and throws rainbow patterns across the white painted walls. Thomas runs his hand along the smooth iron of the spiral staircase, feeling the solid reliability of this tower that has stood sentinel here for more than a century. He thinks of all the storms this lighthouse has weathered, all the ships it has guided safely home, all the quiet dawns and peaceful evenings it has witnessed. Today begins another year in that long, proud history. Another year of faithful service, of steady light cutting through darkness, of quiet vigilance over the endless sea. From his kitchen window, Thomas can see his weather instruments standing ready, the barometer that will warn him of approaching storms, the wind vane that will tell him which direction danger might come from, the rain gauge that will measure the sky's generosity. All of them patient, reliable companions in his work of reading the moods of sea and sky. As the sun climbs higher, warming the lighthouse walls and beginning to dry the night's gentle dew, Thomas feels a deep contentment settle over him. This is his calling, his purpose, to be here at the edge of the world, watching over the boundary between land and sea, to be the keeper of the light that guides travelers safely through the darkness. He pours himself a cup of tea and returns to his post by the window, watching as the new day unfolds in all its quiet glory. The sea sparkles now in the full light of morning, and somewhere beyond the horizon, another year of wonders waits to be discovered. The lighthouse stands ready, and so does Thomas. The autumn fog rolls in like a gentle gray blanket as Thomas spots the small Coast Guard vessel approaching through the morning mist. He sets down his maintenance tools and makes his way down the winding path to the dock, his weathered hands smoothing his thick wool sweater. After 37 years of solitude broken only by supply visits, the arrival of someone who will stay feels momentous. The young man who steps onto the wooden planks carries himself with the careful eagerness of someone trying to make a good impression. His uniform is crisp, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his eyes hold that particular brightness of youth meeting purpose for the first time. Thomas remembers that look from his own reflection decades ago. "You must be Samuel," Thomas says, extending a calloused hand. The young assistant's grip is firm but respectful, and Thomas notices the slight tremor of nervous excitement. "Yes, Sir Samuel Chen. Thank you for agreeing to train me." His voice carries traces of the mainland, but there's something in his stance that suggests he belongs near water. As they climb the path together, Thomas points out the various buildings that make up their small world. The foghorn building with its deep, resonant voice. The storage shed where lamp oil and cleaning supplies rest in neat rows. The small garden where hardy vegetables grow despite the salt air. Each structure tells a story of careful planning and patient maintenance. Inside the lighthouse, Samuel's eyes widen as he takes in the spiral staircase that winds upward like a nautilus shell. Thomas watches the young man's gaze follow the iron steps, counting them perhaps, or simply marveling at their purpose. 137 steps, Thomas says quietly. "I've climbed them at least twice daily for more years than you've been alive." They begin the ascent slowly. Thomas notices how Samuel pauses occasionally, not from fatigue but from wonder, running his fingers along the smooth stone walls worn by countless hands. The lighthouse seems to welcome this new presence, the autumn light filtering through small windows, casting warm patches on each landing. In the lantern room, surrounded by the great lens, Thomas begins the first lesson. His hands move with practiced grace as he demonstrates the cleaning ritual, each motion deliberate and reverent. "The lens is the heart of everything we do," he explains, his voice taking on the cadence of generations of keepers before him. "These pieces of glass have guided thousands of souls safely home." Samuel watches intently, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that reveal he understands the weight of responsibility they're discussing. When Thomas hands him the soft cloth and guides his movements across the curved surface, the young man's touch is appropriately gentle, almost ceremonial. "My grandfather was a fisherman," Samuel shares as they work together in comfortable rhythm. "He used to tell me stories about lighthouse keepers, how they were like guardian angels watching over the water." Thomas smiles at this, remembering his own grandfather's tales of the sea. The afternoon passes quietly as Thomas shows Samuel the logbooks, their pages filled with decades of careful observations. Wind speeds and directions, weather patterns, ships passing safely in the night, each entry a small testament to vigilance rewarded. Samuel runs his finger down the columns of Thomas's neat handwriting, absorbing not just the information but the dedication each line represents. As evening approaches, they share a simple dinner of fish stew and warm bread. Thomas finds himself talking more than he has in months, sharing not just the technical aspects of lighthouse keeping but its deeper meaning. The meditation of routine maintenance, the profound satisfaction of knowing ships navigate safely because of your care. The way the rhythm of seasons and tides becomes part of your own heartbeat. Samuel listens with the focused attention of someone who recognizes wisdom when he hears it. He asks about storms weathered, about the loneliest nights, about what keeps a person committed to such solitary but vital work. Thomas answers honestly, describing both the challenges and the unexpected joys of this calling. When full darkness settles over the water, they climb together to light the beacon for Samuel's first time. Thomas places his weathered hands over the young man's steady ones as they ignite the flame that will burn through the night. The light springs to life, casting its protective beam across the dark waters, and Thomas sees his own younger self reflected in Samuel's expression of profound responsibility accepted. Standing in the golden glow of the lantern, watching Samuel already scanning the horizon with a keeper's instinctive vigilance, Thomas feels the deep satisfaction of knowledge passing safely from one generation to the next. The lighthouse will continue its eternal watch, tended by hands both new and committed, guided by wisdom as old as the sea itself. The autumn morning arrives with a gentle mist rolling in from the horizon, and Thomas stands at the gallery deck of his beloved lighthouse, watching as a small boat cuts through the calm waters toward shore. Today marks the beginning of something he has both anticipated and quietly dreaded: the arrival of young Samuel, who will spend the coming weeks learning not just the mechanics of lighthouse keeping, but the deeper rhythms that have governed Thomas's life for nearly 4 decades. Samuel's footsteps echo up the iron spiral staircase, each clang a reminder of all the times Thomas himself has climbed these same steps, in storm and stillness, in the deep of winter and the height of summer. The young man appears at the top, slightly breathless, his eyes wide with the wonder that Thomas remembers feeling so long ago when he first glimpsed the world from this height. "The view never grows old," Thomas says softly, his weathered hands resting on the iron railing. "Every day the sea shows you something different. Learn to read her moods, and she'll tell you everything you need to know." Together, they begin the morning ritual that has anchored Thomas's days for so many years. First, the lens inspection, each piece of curved glass examined for salt spray, each surface polished until it gleams like captured starlight. Thomas moves with the practiced grace of decades, his movements economical and sure, while Samuel watches with the careful attention of someone who understands he is witnessing something sacred. The light, Thomas explains as he adjusts the mechanism, is more than just a beacon. It's a promise. Every ship that passes, every soul on the water, they trust that we'll be here, steady and true. That trust is what we tend, as much as we tend the flame. They descend to the watchroom where the logbooks rest in neat rows, each one a chronicle of weather patterns, ship sightings, and the subtle changes that mark the passage of seasons. Thomas opens the current volume, his finger tracing entries written in his careful script. See how the fog patterns shift as the year turns, how the birds change their flight paths before storms. These details aren't just for record keeping, they are the lighthouse's memory. Samuel nods, and Thomas sees in his eager expression the same hunger for knowledge that once burned in his own chest. The older keeper begins to share the subtler aspects of his craft, how the quality of light at dawn can predict the weather hours ahead, how the sound of waves against the rocks changes with the tide and season, how even the behavior of seabirds can warn of approaching storms. As they work together to prepare the afternoon meal, Thomas finds himself sharing stories that have lived in his heart for years. The merchant vessel that sheltered in their lee during a fierce gale, the family of whales that passed by each spring for a decade, the northern lights that painted the winter sky in colors so vivid they seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Solitude, Thomas says as they sit at the small table, sharing bread and soup while the afternoon light streams through the windows, can be either a burden or a gift. The lighthouse teaches you the difference. When you understand that you're not alone, that you're connected to every ship, every star, every tide, the isolation transforms into something deeper, a kind of peace that most people spend their whole lives searching for. The day progresses with the steady rhythm that defines lighthouse life. They check the fuel levels, examine the weather instruments, and prepare the evening light. As sunset approaches, Thomas leads Samuel to the gallery once more, where they watch the sky transform from blue to gold to deep purple. "This is the moment," Thomas whispers as he ignites the beacon, "when day passes into night, when we become the guardians of those who travel in darkness. The light that reaches out from here tonight might guide a fishing boat safely home, or offer comfort to a sailor far from shore. We may never know whose life we touch, but that's the beauty of it, the trust given freely, the service offered without expectation of recognition." The great lens begins its slow rotation, casting its beam across the darkening waters in the eternal rhythm that has marked Thomas's years. Soon, this will be Samuel's rhythm, his responsibility, his privilege. As the first stars appear in the clear night sky, Thomas feels a deep contentment settle over him like a familiar blanket. The lighthouse will continue its faithful watch. The light will burn steady and true, and somewhere out on the vast ocean, sailors will see that beacon and know they are not alone. The torch passes gently from one keeper to the next, carrying with it not just duty, but love for the sea, for the light, and for the ancient trust between those who keep the beacon burning and those who depend upon its glow. The fog rolls in from the Atlantic as twilight settles over the rocky coastline, and Thomas climbs the spiral staircase one final time as keeper of Beacon Point Light. His weathered hand slides along the iron railing, worn smooth by decades of his touch, each step echoing softly in the tower that has been his world for 37 years. At the top of the lighthouse, the great lens assembly stands ready for its nightly duty. Thomas moves through the familiar ritual with practiced grace, checking the oil levels, adjusting the wick, ensuring the mechanism that turns the beacon operates without a whisper. The massive glass lens, polished to perfection, catches the last rays of daylight and throws prismatic rainbows across the lamp room walls. As darkness deepens over the water, Thomas strikes the match and touches it to the wick. The flame springs to life, growing steady and strong, and the beacon begins its eternal sweep across the sea. One revolution every 10 seconds, casting its protective light 14 miles into the Atlantic, just as it has done every night since Thomas first took the watch as a young man. He settles into his chair beside the great light, the same wooden chair his predecessor had used, its arms polished smooth by countless hours of vigilant waiting. Through the lamp room windows, the beam illuminates patches of sea in steady rhythm, dark water, brilliant silver, dark again. The familiar sound of waves against the rocky shore below mingles with the gentle clockwork ticking of the lens assembly. Thomas opens his logbook for the final entry. His handwriting, still steady despite his 71 years, records the weather conditions, wind direction, and visibility. Fair skies, southwest wind at 10 knots, clear horizon. A perfect night for his last watch. He sets down the pen and allows himself a moment to simply listen to the sounds that have been his companions for so many years. The whisper of wind around the tower, the distant cry of gulls settling for the night, the rhythmic wash of waves below. Rising from his chair, he begins his final tour of the lighthouse. Each level holds memories worn smooth as sea glass. The watch room, where he spent countless hours scanning the horizon with his telescope, spotting ships in distress, recording the passage of vessels through these waters. The lens room, where he cleaned and maintained the precious optics that meant the difference between safe passage and disaster for mariners. On the middle level, his small quarters still hold the scent of pipe tobacco and salt air. The narrow bed where he rested between watches, the small table where he took his meals, the bookshelf filled with maritime journals and well-worn novels. Each item tells the story of a life dedicated to the sea and those who sail upon it. He descends to the base of the tower, running his hand along the curved stone walls. These blocks were quarried from local granite over a century ago, fitted together with the skill of master craftsmen who built for the ages. The foundation has weathered countless storms, standing firm against the fury of nor'easters and the relentless erosion of salt spray and time. Back in the lamp room, Thomas checks his chronometer. 3 hours past midnight. The beacon continues its steady sweep, and he knows that somewhere out on the dark Atlantic, ship's captains are noting the light, plotting their positions, making course corrections that will bring them safely to port. This knowledge has given meaning to every night watch, every maintenance task, every moment of vigilance. As dawn approaches, Thomas prepares to extinguish the beacon for the final time. The sky lightens gradually from deep purple to soft gray, and the morning star fades as the sun's first rays paint the eastern horizon in shades of rose and gold. The automatic timing mechanism will shut down the light precisely at sunrise, as it has done for thousands of mornings. But today, Thomas performs the task himself. He reaches for the control valve and slowly reduces the flow of oil to the burner. The bright flame diminishes gradually, flickering once before settling to darkness. The great lens stops its rotation, coming to rest facing southeast toward the shipping lanes he has watched over for so many years. Thomas stands quietly in the sudden stillness, watching the sun rise over waters he knows as intimately as a farmer knows his fields. The morning light reveals familiar landmarks: the rocky outcropping where seals gather, the small island where terns nest each summer, the channel markers that guide vessels into the harbor. His replacement will arrive with the morning supply boat, a younger man eager to take up the sacred trust of keeping the light. Thomas has trained him well, sharing not just the mechanical knowledge but the deeper understanding that comes only from years of faithful service. The lighthouse will be in good hands. As the supply boat's whistle echoes across the water, Thomas takes one last look around the lamp room, then begins his descent of the spiral staircase. His watch is ended, but the beacon will shine on, as constant as the tides, as enduring as the sea itself. The first pale threads of dawn stretch across the eastern horizon as Thomas makes his final climb up the spiral staircase of Beacon Point Lighthouse. His weathered hands, steady despite his 73 years, trace the familiar iron railing one last time. Each step echoes softly in the tower, a gentle percussion that has marked the rhythm of his life for over 4 decades. At the top of the lighthouse, Thomas pauses before the great lens, its polished surface catching the earliest whispers of morning light. The massive Fresnel lens has been his constant companion through countless nights, its crystalline facets refracting hope into the darkness. He runs his fingers along its smooth edges, feeling the subtle warmth that still radiates from the night's vigil. Below, the sea spreads out in endless undulations of gray and silver. The waves roll in their eternal pattern, each one carrying stories from distant shores. Thomas has watched these waters through every season, through gentle summer swells and fierce winter storms. He knows each current, each hidden reef, each safe passage that sailors must navigate to reach the harbor. The mechanical clockwork that rotates the lens continues its precise revolution, casting beams of light that sweep across the water in measured intervals. Even now, as daylight begins to claim the sky, the beacon maintains its faithful watch. Thomas adjusts the mechanism with practiced hands, ensuring its rhythm remains true. The light must never falter, not even in transition. Young Samuel appears at the top of the stairs, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. The morning ritual they have shared these past months brings comfort to Thomas's heart. Samuel's eager face reflects the same dedication Thomas felt when he first took charge of this sacred post. The young man sets down the cups and joins Thomas at the great window overlooking the sea. The sunrise is particularly beautiful this morning, Samuel observes quietly, his voice filled with reverence for the moment. Thomas nods, watching as the sun crests the horizon, painting the sky in soft brushstrokes of rose and gold. The lighthouse beam grows paler against the strengthening daylight, but its presence remains constant. Soon, the light will rest during the day, gathering energy for another night of faithful service. "She's been a good companion," Thomas says, patting the lighthouse's stone wall affectionately. "Never missed a night, never failed a soul who needed guidance home." They stand together in comfortable silence, two generations of lighthouse keepers united by their shared purpose. The morning air carries the salt tang of the sea and the distant cry of gulls beginning their daily hunt. A fishing boat appears on the horizon, its small silhouette heading toward shore after a night at sea. Thomas points toward the vessel. That's Captain Morrison's boat. I've guided him home through more storms than I can count. His father before him, too. The continuity of service stretches back through decades, connecting Thomas to all the keepers who came before and all who will come after. As the sun climbs higher, Thomas begins the formal transfer of responsibility. He shows Samuel the logbooks where every weather pattern, every rescue, every routine maintenance task has been carefully recorded. The leather-bound volumes contain the lighthouse's memory, a testament to unwavering dedication. The light belongs to everyone who needs safe passage, Thomas explains, his voice warm with conviction. We are merely its guardians, ensuring it never dims when hope depends upon it. Samuel accepts the brass key to the lamp room, his young hands steady and sure. Thomas sees in his successor the same calling that has driven lighthouse keepers for generations. The beacon will continue its eternal watch under new care, its light reaching across the waters to guide travelers safely home. The lighthouse stands magnificent in the growing daylight, its white tower gleaming against the blue sky. Seabirds circle its crown, their wings catching up drafts from the warming air. The structure has weathered countless storms, its foundation rooted deep in the coastal rocks, its purpose unwavering through decades of faithful service. As Thomas prepares for his final descent, he takes one last look at the lens that has been his life's work. The great beacon rests now in daylight, but tonight it will shine again, casting its protective beam across the dark waters. Under Samuel's careful tending, the light will continue its sacred duty, eternal and unchanging. The lighthouse keeper's year has come full circle, but the story continues. The beacon that has guided countless souls safely through treacherous waters will shine on, its light carrying forward the dedication of all who have answered its call. In the gentle rhythm of the waves below and the steady turning of the lens above, Thomas finds perfect peace, knowing that some lights burn forever.